Good evening. This is the Council's sixth work session, in which we'll review the County Executive's proposed general plan, HOCO by Design. The proceeding this evening is a hybrid meeting, which is being held in person and via WebEx teleconference. It is also available to the public via video stream online at the County Council website. The Council will conduct a series of work sessions and public hearings to review and obtain public comment on the proposed HOCO by Design. Today's session covers Chapter 6, Dynamic Neighborhoods. The Council will host a third public hearing on September 19th at 7 p.m. and additional work sessions in September. A complete calendar of Council meetings regarding the general plan can be found on the Council's website. At this time, I'm going to do a roll call of the members. Vice Chair Young?
Here.
Mr. Youngman?
Here.
And is Ms. Walsh online? Okay. We will now proceed with our agenda. So, in regards to dynamic neighborhoods, we're going to have a presentation from the HOCO by Design core team, and look forward to it.
All right, I'll kick it off. Good evening, members of the council. It's lovely to be here again with you. And tonight, as Council Chair Rigby said, we're going to be talking about the Dynamic Neighborhoods chapter. So we are joined by our usual DPZ team with Kristen O'Connor and Sarah Latimer online. Our consultant, Matt Newcastle from City Explain, is online. Jake Ross from RCLCO, he is also online, and I'll talk a little bit about what his role has been in this chapter with regards to the general plan and also the Housing Opportunities Master Plan in a bit. Kelly Simoneau from DHCD is here in the audience, Mike Davis from the Department of Health, and Chad Edmondson also from DPZ, who will be here to assist with potentially answering any questions you may have. Excellent. So the primary purpose of this chapter is to provide guidance on the county's future housing policies. And there's really a strong emphasis on how we can create more diverse housing options throughout the county in the interest of supporting a more equitable future for all. There are 5 topics in this chapter. So we're going to cover some of the key policies and actions related to how we can diversify housing typologies permitted in the county. We'll discuss guidance for expanding diverse housing choices throughout the county. We'll also share some guidance for how we can create more housing options for specific populations, including low and moderate income households, our older adult population, and unhoused or homeless. And finally, we'll discuss some of our policies or recommendations related to affordable housing preservation and neighborhood revitalization. So once we adopt the general plan, there are various documents that will further guide into implementation, and they're listed on this slide. And next we get into kind of what we heard. So this is what we heard from the public throughout the planning process. And overall, generally, the public does want to see new housing that is attainable and affordable to a variety of income levels. They felt that redevelopment opportunities should offer a variety of housing choices from high density to moderate density housing options like missing middle homes. But we, of course, did hear that community members have concerns regarding the impact that new housing has on county infrastructure like schools and roads, but they also recognize we do have a need for more financially attainable housing. And there's also interest in seeing design that is sensitive to neighborhood character, context, and the environment. So the next slide shows just a few quotes that we heard throughout the process. You can go to our engagement summary, which is online, if you would like to read more, or of course our comment log. All right. And for this particular chapter, Dynamic Neighborhoods, a lot of what's in there was also informed by our strategic advisory group. So as a reminder, we formed 3 strategic advisory groups for this planning process. That was specifically to discuss key areas of concern or opportunity in the county. And those overarching areas were housing, schools, and the environment. So specific to the Housing Strategic Advisory Group, they did focus on missing middle housing. And we asked them to discuss what are the needs for missing middle housing here in the county? What could missing middle housing look like? Where in the county could it be located? And what zoning changes need to occur to make it possible? And some of the key findings from the Strategic Advisory Group was, 1, that our zoning regulations limit opportunities for missing middle homes and accessory dwelling units throughout the county. We have limited affordable housing options for older adults, low and moderate income households, and our essential workers. And also out in the rural west, that we have a low-density, large lot development pattern, and a lot of that generally, the homes out there are unaffordable to much of our workforce. However, the rural west does exist on well and septic, so that contributes to development limitations. A good bit of data and findings and recommendations from the Housing Opportunities Master Plan also informed this chapter, which had its own separate public process. The Housing Opportunities Master Plan was developed to assess the current state of housing and identify housing needs in the county, an effort that actually hasn't been undertaken in over 10 years. And I do just want to remind everyone, I mentioned why is RCLCO here, so Jake Ross from RCLCO is here to help answer any questions you may have about the data or recommendations that are both in the Housing Opportunities Master Plan. But not only did RCLCO advise on the HUMP, they also prepared the HOCO by Design market and economics analysis for our demand data. So please, please, please take advantage of this firm's expertise. We're really excited they're here tonight. All right, so into some of the findings. The Housing Opportunities Master Plan basically identified some of the following challenges in our housing market. One, there is a mismatch between the county employment base and housing supply. According to the data that they analyzed for the Housing Opportunities Master Plan, only 25% of the employees who work in the county also live in the county. In terms of a jobs housing balance, in 2019, we only had 0.69 housing units for every job. So as you can see on the slide, that generally is much lower compared to our neighboring jurisdictions. Now, while it's not unusual for households to live in different locations than the ones in which they work, this is a pretty significant mismatch, and it suggests that the county, we just lack the inventory to support our employees. So if we don't have the supply to meet the demand, our housing prices will continue to increase, and our employers' abilities to recruit talent will decrease, because especially for those employees who want to live close to their places of employment if they don't have a telework option. Also, through the Housing Opportunities Master Plan, they found that new housing tends to be larger, more expensive. We aren't building that many smaller homes. According to 2019 data, only about 17% of new single-family homes that were built were under 3,000 square feet. They also took a look at what our rental housing demand is. So for rental housing, that demand also exceeds supply, specifically for households making less than 60% of the area median income or more than 120% of the area median income. So within this dynamic neighborhoods chapter, you'll see that we talk a lot about affordability challenges for low and moderate income households. So what is a low or moderate income household? So in Howard County, the area median income is about $120,000 a year. A low-income household makes about 30 to 60% of the area median income, or AMI. So that's between $36,000 to about $72,000 a year. So types of industries that pay wages in this income bracket here in the county include elementary and secondary schools, nursing and residential care facilities, janitorial services, child and daycare services, restaurants and grocery stores. So these are all services we need and will continue to need here in the county. However, a moderate income household is a household that makes 60 to 120% of the area median income. So that's between $72,000 and $145,000 a year. Types of industry that pay wages in this income bracket include veterinary services, accounting, and hospitals. So in 2019, the Housing Opportunities Master Plan found that only 25% of all of the for-sale housing units, to include new construction and resales, were affordable to households making less than $145,000 a year. So that was only 25% of all for-sale housing units were affordable to households making less than $145,000 a year, and only 9% were affordable to households making less than $73,000. So other data that we used to inform this particular chapter and this plan was, of course, the data from our market and economics assessment. And in that, you've all heard that they projected a demand for about 31,000 new homes, and we thought it would be helpful to share the breakdown. And they're projecting that about 20,000 of those would be for-sale opportunities and about 11,000 are rental. Overall, they have noticed an increase in rentership across almost every age group, and that's in part due to households' preferences. People are just preferring to rent, but it's also because of the high cost and limited supply of for-sale housing. So overall, in our market and economics assessment, it was found that we just have a need for a variety of housing options here in the county, including both rental and attainably priced for-sale housing. And overall, there was also a finding that our housing preferences just seem to be shifting towards smaller homes, just a desire for a smaller home. So based on these findings, so we took a lot of the data and findings to inform our policies and the topics covered in this plan. So the first policy focus on how do we diverse the housing typologies permitted in the county. And when we talk about diverse housing types, what are we talking about? We're talking about missing middle homes and accessory dwelling units. Missing middle homes, they're small to medium-sized homes that are often available at a range of price points. So you can see in the graphic, in the terms of size and scale, they can be similar to a single-family detached home, or they could be larger in size and scale, like a garden-style multifamily building. So these housing types really have the opportunity to blend with a single-family neighborhood or offer a transition between higher density or lower density housing. These home types, do want to point out, they tend to offer more than one dwelling unit on one lot, such as a duplex that's not divided by a lot line, a triplex, or a stacked townhome. Also, other housing types are called cottage courts or clusters. Next slide shows you a couple of examples of what these missing middle housing types look like. The photos on the left and the right are examples of a more modern style duplex, and then the photo in the middle is a cottage cluster, which are just smaller single-family detached homes where all of the homes are oriented towards a common green space or a shared green space. So you can see how they look, feel a bit like a single-family detached home, which can allow it to blend into the neighborhood character. Now, this next group of slides was really just, we wanted to send them to you in advance. So these are images from Howard County of some of these missing middle housing types, a combination of smaller attached row homes, duplexes, and I believe a couple of accessory dwelling units are in the series of photos. So keep going. Those are stacked townhomes in the bottom right, and yep, and keep going. Keep going to the map. All right. So, as we heard from our strategic advisory group, so one of the challenges or issues as it pertains to missing middle housing types is under our current zoning regulations, we don't have very many locations where missing middle homes can be built by right. Again, that's because generally a missing middle home requires you need to have more than one unit on a residential lot. So this map shows where single-family detached homes can be built by right, which covers the majority of the county. The area in gray, we do have a map for that, but that is where we have Newtown zoning. Next slide. So now this area in the peach tan-like color, this is where you can, where we permit single-family semi-detached and attached units by right. So those are our duplexes on a separate lot and our townhomes. And then when you get into this next slide, so the orange-red areas, this is where multifamily homes or mixed-use development is permitted by right. A multifamily home, by definition, is where you're allowed to put 3 or more units on one lot. So a lot of these areas is where you'll find our larger apartment buildings, condominiums, and stacked townhomes. So we only allow that in so many parts of the county. And then this is a look at Newtown zoning, so that, of course, is different from the rest of the county, and the final development plans, or FDPs, determine what housing types can be built where, and generally the housing types are categorized into apartments and mixed use, garden-style apartments and single-family detached low density, and single-family attached medium density. So you can see where those housing types are permitted according to FDPs. So then the plan also talks about accessory dwelling units, right, as another housing type that could create more affordable housing options here in the county. So an accessory dwelling unit is a smaller independent residential unit located on the same lot as a single-family detached home. Not only are these housing types believed to provide a lower cost housing option, they could provide opportunities for homeowners to supplement their income if they wanted to rent an accessory dwelling unit. They can take a variety of shapes and sizes. Attached accessory dwelling units, they might be in your basement or an attic. Or sometimes there's a detached accessory dwelling unit, so that could be within a detached garage if someone wanted to convert it into a rental unit, or it could be a separate independent structure. Under our current zoning regulations, we refer to these as attached or detached accessory apartments. And under our regulations, attached accessory apartments are allowed as an accessory use in most residential zoning districts, but there are specific site requirements or building criteria that have to be met in order to be allowed. And our detached accessory apartments are only permitted conditionally and on a temporary basis, specifically for an elderly or disabled family member. So if you already have a detached garage on your property, you cannot convert it into a detached accessory apartment, unless it's just on a temporary basis. Okay. So this leads us to our first policy in the chapter, which calls for creating zoning tools and incentives for missing middle housing. And some of those possible tools that we'll be looking at once we get to the comp rezoning is zoning overlays or floating zones, density bonus tools such as transfer development rights or density bonuses, tax incentives. Excuse me, I'm gonna have some water. Continuing on. Tax incentives for developers and landowners, and also certain development standards, such as allowing smaller lot sizes or setting maximum building sizes. Other actions associated with the first policy include exploring opportunities to work with partners to build missing middle housing demonstration projects or establish models and designs for these housing types. So this is really important to being able to implement missing middle housing types because while we've heard that demand exists for these smaller housing types, the missing middle housing is an uncommon housing product within our building industry today, which means there could be uncertain returns on investment. So local jurisdictions may need to pave the way to test out new regulations and demonstrate the cost, demand, and overall create some predictability for the public and for developers. Yeah, I guess I don't want to talk today. Okay. Second policy, allow both attached and detached accessory dwelling units on a variety of single-family attached and detached lots. All right, this brings us to our next section. Where are there future opportunity areas for housing over the next 20 years? And that's more or less categorized into, we have our activity centers, which we've been hearing a lot about. We have multifamily communities. And these are places where the plan is proposing to concentrate the most amount of growth, redevelopment, and transformation. And then some opportunities will also be available through infill in existing residential neighborhoods, both in the east and the west. So as we have discussed in our previous work sessions, activity centers are envisioned to have denser housing and a mix of uses, and will be built in a way that are walkable, have open space, amenities, connections to existing or future public transit or multimodal transportation. Activity centers are discussed in most chapters, as we are all hearing. But this particular chapter, Dynamic Neighborhoods, focuses on their housing mix. And this plan calls for activity centers to have a range of housing types that are both accessible and affordable through updates to zoning regulations in which we'll need to establish mixed density or mixed use zoning districts for these places, as well as recommending incentives for the production of units that are affordable to low to moderate income households beyond what is currently required by our moderate income housing unit program. So the plan also suggests that aging multifamily properties may offer redevelopment opportunities. So these are different from activity centers. Activity centers are mostly larger shopping centers planned for redevelopment. Multifamily communities are existing older multifamily properties. And redeveloped multifamily communities are envisioned to help meet the projected rental demand for over 11,000 units over the next 20 years. And the redevelopment of these aging multifamily properties could result in a greater number of units while adding amenities, green space, and walkable connection to other places. So this policy related to multifamily communities provides guidance for new development and redevelopment of multifamily rental properties that says when redeveloping multifamily properties, we should ensure that resident displacement is minimized. We should support projects that serve a range of income levels to create mixed income communities. And in redevelopment projects, we should strive for a one-to-one replacement of affordable units. So the plan also looks at opportunities for infill development within existing residential neighborhoods. And the plan says that we should seek opportunities for small-scale missing middle housing and accessory dwelling units in single-family neighborhoods and the east and the west. So as you heard in our previous work session on quality by design, missing middle housing and accessory dwelling units should follow specific site design or building criteria that could be established in pattern books, former character-based code, or design guidelines to help ensure that this new housing type remains consistent with the neighborhood character. And specifically with regards to accessory dwelling units, they should also comply with design standards in addition to looking at how accessory dwelling units or other types of new development could enhance or impact stormwater management practices within these single-family neighborhoods. So on to the rural west. So throughout this process, we were asked to consider moving the planned service area line to allow for greater housing diversity out in the west. However, we did evaluate that as a part of our scenario planning analysis, and we did identify numerous fiscal and practical implications or challenges to that approach. So in lieu of expanding the PSA or the planned service area, we offer policies that allow and encourage more diverse housing options in the West. Specifically, the plan calls out the rural crossroads as a place for missing middle housing types, which could be accommodated by encouraging upper story residential development or small-scale infill. And small-scale residential opportunities within the rural crossroads could increase the number of residents that live walking distance to local small businesses and maybe create a mini Main Street feel in these areas. The plan also recommends that we determine if there are strategic locations where it could be feasible or desirable for allowing more of these diverse housing types, say through a housing development. So as a reminder, missing middle homes, right, they're generally 2 or more units on one lot. They're usually on smaller lots, clustered in close proximity to each other. And depending on the total number of units, bedrooms, projected amount of discharge that could come from these units, they may require shared or multi-use septic systems. So the plan includes policies to and actions to facilitate the use of these systems, recognizing that county or state code clarifications related to facility ownership, regulation, and maintenance may also be necessary. Let's see. So finally, policy 10, hopefully this doesn't seem like too much out of left field, but we felt the need to recognize that out in the West, we also have a lot of agricultural land that has been preserved through, almost 50, over the course of the last almost 50 years. So we have to recognize that we were going to need to continue to evaluate and establish policies, programs, and zoning practices aimed at reducing conflicts between residential and agricultural land uses. So now we're going to cover the topics and some of the policies related to increasing the supply of housing for specific populations. And that includes older adults and those with varying abilities, our homeless population, and low and moderate income households. So let's start with policies and actions for increasing the supply of income restricted units. So we all know here in Howard County we have a moderate income housing unit program, or MIHU, and that requires that all new residential developments in specific zoning districts to set aside units for low to moderate income households. And this includes both for sale and rental units. And currently we have 20 zoning districts with MIHU requirements. And generally the total production of MIHU units, or MIHUs, is proportionate to the overall quantity of new development. Missing middle housing and income restricted units, they are not necessarily one and the same. A missing middle home is a housing type that can be affordable to a variety of incomes due to its smaller size, but an income restricted unit is only available to households that fall within a specific income bracket due to a subsidy or a regulation or some sort of government intervention. So HOCO by Design has policies specifically that aim to increase the supply of for sale and rental housing units in all new developments that are attainable or affordable to low to moderate income and special needs households. And this will primarily be implemented through the continuation and expansion of the MIHU program, by establishing goals for affordable housing in future area plans, and by establishing a work group to evaluate the feasibility of a targeted incentive program for affordable and accessible housing. So specific to that affordable housing set aside, So if you recall, when we were looking at the Apfo housing allocation chart, so that affordable housing set aside is directly related to what this work group will evaluate, which is to determine how this is set aside can best incentivize income-restricted affordable housing development beyond MIHU requirements. So now when we get into this next policy, the previous one was just focused on increasing the supply of affordable for sale and rental homes. So this is specific to the incentives that will help us to increase the supply of homes that are affordable to low to moderate income households. So the plan identifies the Housing Opportunities Trust Fund as a funding source to support the production of affordable units, and recommends that we explore the feasibility of establishing a dedicated funding source. It also suggests that we use county-owned land to advance affordable housing goals, either through co-locating income-restricted housing and community facilities, or establishing criteria for flexible use and disposition of county real estate assets. Finally, not only do developers need incentives for building affordable housing, but future home buyers need them as well, which is why the plan also recommends that we continue increasing financial assistance through the county's settlement down payment loan program. So, as we know, our older adult population is growing in Howard County. The Howard County Age-Friendly Action Plan states that by 2030, 1 in 5 Howard County residents will be 65 or older. So given the projected growth in this age group and the importance and significance of this age group, we dedicated a section of this plan to housing for older adults. And many of the policies in here were informed by the Age-Friendly Action Plan. And what we heard from participants is they want housing that's affordable to a variety of income ranges and appeals to all ages and abilities. They want to see universal design integrated into the development of new homes and communities, communal living, missing middle housing, attached and detached accessory dwelling units, because they all can help provide opportunities for older adults to age in community or age in place. We also heard that older adults want to see more age-friendly neighborhoods or communities. These are types of communities that we all want to live in. They are safe and secure, they have affordable and appropriate housing and transportation options, and offer supportive community features and services. So HOCO by Design seeks to provide a range of affordable and adaptable housing options for older adults and persons with special needs by providing flexibility in our zoning regulations for adult group homes and communal living, by encouraging the development of smaller scale age-restricted adult housing units, and by updating the county's universal design guidelines. HOCO by Design also calls for creating multi-generational neighborhoods, and activity centers are identified as ideal locations for multi-generational neighborhoods, as these places are envisioned to have diverse housing choices, be a mix of uses, and connected to various transportation options. So this guidance here, much like the guidance that was in Quality by Design, calls for activity centers to be designed with accessibility, universal design, and multimodal transportation options. Okay, next, meeting the needs of the unhoused. So we included this section about providing housing for the homeless based in part on community feedback, and also because addressing housing for the homeless is an equity-based practice. And most of this section was informed by the Path Home, which is the county's strategic plan to end homelessness. And according to the Path Home, one size does not fit all when it comes to housing for the homeless. We have small and large families who are homeless and individuals with physical disabilities. The Path Home recognizes that housing for this population should also be located close to jobs and transportation. So in addition to the policies that I just talked about with regards to increasing the supply of income-restricted homes for low and moderate income households and special needs household, this section has some additional policies or guidance as it pertains to increasing the supply of housing for our homeless. And we should seek additional ways to increase that housing by set-asides in future housing developments, exploring opportunities for acquisition of underutilized properties for flexible shelter options, and we should be being sure to locate that close to transit, jobs, and amenities. And for our last topic, enhancing existing neighborhoods. So in this particular section, there's an emphasis on preserving affordability of existing housing stock and addressing infrastructure and community amenities in our older neighborhoods. And addressing infrastructure and community amenities in our neighborhoods, that is also, there's additional guidance in the supporting infrastructure chapter there as well. So specific to affordable housing preservation, so this was guidance, again, pretty much a lot of this, if not the majority, came from the Housing Opportunities Master Plan. So the HOMP recognized that affordable housing preservation is a critical part of a comprehensive affordable housing strategy. Preservation of affordable units is necessary as we increase the supply of new affordable units. And the county has the following tools to assist us with affordable housing preservation and neighborhood revitalization efforts, such as the right of first refusal, CDBG or Community Development Block Grant and Home Funds, and the RRR program that stands for Reinvest, Renovate, and Restore. And if anyone has any specific questions about what those programs are or what they do, please let us know during the Q&A. So the Housing Opportunities Master Plan refers to neighborhoods with higher concentrations of affordable housing stock, which are neighborhoods that are generally older with smaller homes, as preservation revitalization neighborhoods. And some of these neighborhoods, as identified in the Housing Opportunities Master Plan, are Longreach, Elkridge, and Savage. But the Housing Opportunities Master Plan suggests that as these older neighborhoods experience infill and redevelopment, mixed income opportunities should be encouraged to prevent displacement and concentrations of poverty while encouraging the revitalization of older housing stock. We also need to ensure that these communities have upgraded infrastructure and access to high-quality community facilities, pedestrian infrastructure, open space, and parks as a part of their revitalization strategy. So HOCO by Design looks to preserve the affordability of existing housing stock, especially in preservation revitalization neighborhoods, and create opportunities for context-sensitive infill development and missing middle housing types to foster mixed-income communities through continuing and expanding the existing housing preservation programs that we have, by exploring opportunities and partnership for acquisition rehabilitation programs for older single-family homes or condos to support more moderate-income homeownership opportunities, and develop strategies for employing the right of first refusal policy. HOCO by Design, and the last policy I'm going to cover today, HOCO by Design also recommends that we ensure infrastructure and community amenities are adequate in our existing older neighborhoods. And we should assess existing community facilities and neighborhoods they serve and retrofit and upgrade those facilities or infrastructure as needed, develop comprehensive revitalization strategies or plans for our older communities. And specifically with regards to some of our older rental properties, we heard from a few residents that they experience a lot of maintenance issues, both within their units and around their buildings. So this action suggests that we work with the multifamily rental community to understand barriers to reporting and resolving issues related to property and unit maintenance. So with that, that was maybe one of the quickest presentations we've done for the general plan, because I know that we were a little bit short on time tonight, so we just wanted to try to give everyone the chance to ask their questions.
Thank you so much. It's certainly an important chapter and challenging to get in such a short time. Mr. Youngman, we'll start with you.
Well, that's cool. ADUs. I guess they're first mentioned in policy DN2, but then there's, I guess, DN4 maybe, that they're broken down a little bit. What's the vision for ADUs? Is it that they're rental units, they're ownership units, they get sold as sort of like granny cottages, but I don't see anything in the general plan that suggests that there needs to be any relationship between the owner or occupant of the primary structure and, the auxiliary structure. So what do you envision?
Yeah, so I'd say that, so generally, I think the way the plan looks at accessory dwelling units is we want to create opportunities. We already allow attached accessory dwelling units within a single-family lot, but there's also an idea that, well, can townhomes, should townhomes be allowed to have attached accessory dwelling units as well? And then, so the idea is that think that they would ideally be kind of a rental property for the individual property owner who lives there. Whether the property owner lives within the larger single-family detached home or lives within the ADU, that's up to them. But generally speaking, it would be another, probably a rental opportunity. But the property owner could choose to whom they would rent.
Got it. So in a townhouse, you'd be thinking, like somebody lives on the upper two levels and somebody lives in the basement kind of thing?
Could be. Right. I think so. Specifically, that was a conversation that we had with the Housing Strategic Advisory Group. And I do remember one of the members of the group said, well, what about those English basement apartments in row homes, in Washington, D.C.? Why can't there be opportunities in some of our townhomes to have that type of rental opportunity? So that was the idea behind that.
Okay. The reason why I raised the issue of it being a related party is, again, that's kind of how it's being sold. And just like a lot of the zoning things we deal with, it tends to be a little more self-policing when the owner lives there, versus I buy a townhouse and I'm renting it to two unrelated people and they're not following the covenants or they're bad neighbors or whatever the case might be. But I know that that's fairly detailed into the policy side versus the general plan. But
Right. Good.
I think on the ADU issue, from the DPC's perspective, we're kind of agnostic to the rental versus owner perspective in terms of we're trying to get the form of the buildings correct, how they fit within the neighborhood, the impact that they will have on the neighbors, on how the sites are designed. It's difficult to assume what the rental versus ownership mechanism is going to be because ADUs can serve so many different purposes. We know the number of multi-generational households in our county is growing. So there is the opportunity for people who are looking for their extended family to be able to live with them but want a little bit more separation. We know we have senior population who love the neighborhood they're in, but they can no longer climb the stairs in their house, and they are looking for first floor living opportunities. And so a basement or an attic ADU doesn't serve their needs. And if they could build a cottage in their backyard of their existing home and move into that and then rent their bigger home, that would serve their needs for meeting what they're looking for. And ADUs just provide a lot of different design opportunities for serving a variety of different populations, including college students, your kid who doesn't want to live in your basement but would like to stay in Howard County. So those are kind of the people who might live in one of these kind of housing forms. And what the plan focuses on is allowing them to exist in more zoning districts and then regulating on what lots they should exist on based on certain criteria and the design of those to limit the air impact on their neighbors.
now, for the detached ADUs, if it can be somehow an ownership unit created with a ground lease or something of some kind, and they can be unrelated, or your example of the older couple moving out to the new place and renting the larger house, like at some point, why are we, hand-wringing over ADUs, and why don't we just allow re-subdivision of that property? Because that's what you're basically allowing. It's an end run around the fact that you can't re-subdivide a lot that's already part of a subdivision. Because there's nothing auxiliary anymore about that dwelling unit. It can be owned by somebody different, occupied by somebody different.
No,
So I would say by its very definition, it's an accessory dwelling unit. So it's secondary to the primary principal use, which is single-family home or, a primary principal home, and this is just secondary to it. So by its very definition, it is going to be always subservient to the primary residence that you have. And those typically, unless our zoning regulation says you have to have it on a subdividable lot, which some jurisdictions do. You can have an accessory dwelling unit that's detached on a subdividable lot. Well, then at that point, why wouldn't you build a full-scale home then, as opposed to a smaller accessory dwelling unit? I think what we're saying here is following the implementation of the plan, and when we get to the zoning, what could be suggested is follows the same parameters as the attached, but offset and has it as a detached unit. And then the ability to subdivide would not happen because these wouldn't be lots that are subdividable.
Yeah, and I'm not suggesting that we allow that re-subdivision. I'm just suggesting that, there is a point where the ADUs go so far that you may as well have allowed them,
Right.
to be subdivided, because it's a completely new, standalone, separately controlled additional home. If there was a way to, because I know you guys, like you said, are agnostic on the ownership, so if somebody could figure out a way to ground lease it or something like that, you could end up with some way to sell it. But if it's a rental only, then then you at least have the same owner controlling both of those properties, which makes more sense to me. Okay, thanks.
We'll definitely circle back to that, but I wondered if you could you touched briefly on this, but the community engagement process and sort of how you worked with the public, how you heard their feedback, how you worked to incorporate it. Because I think you guys really took on a very democratic process and really worked to include people's feedback. And I know that this is one of the chapters that had a lot of feedback.
Sure. Yeah. Can I remember? Right.
Well, but in regards to this chapter, because it's an iterative process that you undertook, it wasn't just you put out one survey and said, give us your feedback, we'll see you in 3 years.
No.
And there was a lot around this specific chapter, which is
That's
why
right.
I'm asking it in this specific chapter.
No,
So if you could touch on
I appreciate
and
that.
how you included the public, I would appreciate it.
Sure, no, not a problem, not a problem. Yeah, so we had nearly 100 community meetings in total as a part of this general plan process. Within probably not every single one of those community meetings, but with our first round of public engagement, we did a growth choices workshop, and we had great participation in that particular process. And we specifically talked to that community about what their feelings were on specific to housing, re-subdivision potential, housing and diversity out in the future of the rural West. Yeah.
And just diversifying housing choices in general. We talked about missing middle and ADUs at that stage.
Thank you. So we asked very specific, intentional questions about diversifying housing types throughout the county early on in the process. And like we said, we've received a great deal of input in that stage. But then we also recognized, we really need to hear from our more diverse populations because we weren't hearing those voices. So that's when we launched what we called our Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Focus Group. So we partnered with community-based organizations, about 20 or so of them, to reach out to underrepresented populations. And those populations include young adults, students, single parents, immigrant populations or non-English speakers, and then also more other people from other more diverse populations. And one of the things that we heard over and over again, and what we asked them was specifically about our planning theme chapters, right? So those 5 key planning theme chapters. Generally speaking, what are your thoughts about housing? What are your thoughts about the environment? What are your needs? Every single person said, we need more diverse, affordable housing types, more diverse, affordable housing types. So from almost every single segment of the population, that is what we've heard, right? Including looking to all of these other public engagement processes that we've been doing around housing, such as the age-friendly action plan, and then also the housing opportunities master plan. And then, because we knew that housing was so important to the future of the county, that is why we formed a strategic advisory group, which consisted of a lot of our local experts in the housing area. So, did that.
Thank you. I really appreciate the outreach you did to make sure that this plan in this chapter is really for all in Howard County and not just a select few. Ms. Young?
Good evening, everyone. I invited some people who build houses in Howard County to join us tonight, and I would like them to be able to come up, but we don't really have quite enough room.
I can move. I'm good. I can move.
Twist my arm.
Thanks, Michelle.
Yeah.
Do I get to pick who's allowed to come up?
No, I want all three of them to be up, sorry. No picking and choosing.
Jason,
Not
I mean, we
to
appreciate it,
age
but I don't think you
Joe,
can do
but
the
that's a
show.
little bit of a generational thing you have there. Interesting. Nice.
First, I want to thank all three of you, Jason Van Kirk, Bruce Harvey, Joe Rudder, for joining us tonight. I know that all three of you have been in the development business for quite a while. I think you might be the granddaddy of them all here, Bruce, or maybe Joe. I don't know. It's hard to say, yeah, but you've been here a long time. And I know there are a lot of beautiful homes that you built right in my neighborhood. And I think that it's important to hear from you all as to, we keep hearing what the community wants, what the community wants, what the community wants. And what I would like to hear is what is it that the developers are developing? What is it that's, we keep hearing, but we need more affordable housing. And in this instance, I am presuming that affordable housing are houses, I'm looking at the RCLCO report where they listed a small single-family home, detached home, which supposedly we have 22,260 of here in Howard County, at $257,232 is the average price. And then a moderate home, which is 2,000 to 3,000 square feet, at $481,000, which is an average price. And townhomes, we have 27,000 of those, and the average price is $327,000. So my question, and I think it might be easiest just to start with Mr. Van Kirk and then go down the line. Are you building houses like this at $257,000 and an average price of under 2,000 square feet? And if so, what are you building? And if not, what are the impediments to building houses like that? And can you pull the microphone close to you and make sure that that little green light is on?
Yes, I turn the green light on. Okay. I will pull this closer. I mean, the houses that we are building at that price point are the MIHU townhomes at this point in time this year. That, with the rise in interest rates, has that price point in that $260,000. So that is how those types of homes are being delivered into the county. Otherwise, it is you have the market rate side, which you talked about some of those prices as well. I mean, really, the impediments to housing, there's price or demand problems at all price points, and I really see this as it is a supply demand issue, and it is the demand at all the price point levels is limited because we are not developing the amount of housing that satisfies that demand. So
okay, now why is that?
It's available land, it's proper zoning, it's environmental restrictions, it's the underlining zoning and densities that are allowed to be developed in the county.
And you mentioned available land. Is that problematic here in Howard County? I know we're
Yes,
the
it
second
is.
smallest county
In the entire
geographically
region, too.
in the entire state. And I did find throughout this entire general plan that it just seemed to be over and over again, we need more housing, and there was never a mention of the fact that, but we pretty much have run out of land. So that, and I know for those of you who have been in this business for a really long time, you saw what it looked like at the beginning. So, Mr. Harvey, what what do you see as some of these impediments and going forward? And what's the demand? I mean, I think your company is building a lot of those $900,000 homes, but correct me if I'm wrong. And they seem to be selling pretty well. So I assume that there's a demand for them. And I would also imagine, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, but that from what I've seen from RCL Code, that those homes have a bigger return on your investment.
So, lots of questions.
That was a lot of questions. I'm sorry. That was like 5 questions, and yeah, that was a lot.
So, I mean, today we're in a very unique situation. So, because of inventory and because of resale inventory as well. So we do have this massive shortage that has raised, just because people aren't selling their own home. So and that's not unique to Howard County. That's all over. So we have a very unique situation, which kind of taints what I'm saying. So what we like in what the plan says in terms of the unique housing types is something that we're very interested in that all of us as developers and builders are very, we do what sells, and we do what's been done before. And so when we go out of that, when we're talking to a new land seller and we want to create something, we look at the zoning. The zoning is the same as it's been, it hasn't really changed. And it's RED, it's R20, it's R8, and that's what we're going to do. And so it really does take some fortitude to get beyond that. And, we have a whole segment in the West that's RC or RR, and, that's
There's nothing we can do about that.
There's not much we can do about
Yeah.
that. So, and we participate quite a bit in that, and there's obviously a lot of demand. So I don't think, the problem with creating, $400,000 homes is clearly land price, clearly the cost of development, the cost of the environmental changes that we've made that are important to everyone, but they're very, very expensive. Forest conservation is very, very challenging. You get a wooded site, you pretty much just drop it off. You say, I can't do it today. So cost of land is a big component, clearly. But overall, as well, the cost of construction has both infrastructure and housing has gone substantially up. And so that's impacting anyone's ability to create, more affordable units. But if we get to smaller unit types, if we get to density options, we hate to use that word, that allow some of this, if we get to redevelopment opportunities that do 2-for-1, 3-for-1, they're going to create, maybe not, we don't want to use the word affordable. That's why we like the word Missy Middle. I call it rationally priced, because we can't get there today. It's very, very difficult.
I'm trying to imagine with that. I mean, this plan keeps talking about Missy Middle as if duplexes and triplexes and quadruplexes will be the Missy Middle and the little cottages. I don't know that we'll ever have the land for these little cottages, because whenever I talk to a developer about what can happen here, I do hear over and over again about vertical building up because there's not enough land left. And I'm wondering, I've been trying to envision this. You find a piece of land that's big enough to put a duplex on it, and then it costs, I don't know what it costs to build a duplex, $500,000, $400,000, and the piece of land would have to be obviously a lot less than that for you to make money. And then the duplex, each side of the duplex would have to sell, I would think, for at least, now we're back to $450,000.
Correct.
And, okay, all right. I am
But we
trying
can't
to.
do that today.
And you can't do that today. You can't. And I understand that. And I think that it's hard to envision some of these aspects of this
Very
plan
hard.
coming to life.
No, it's
okay?
very hard. And
It's very
I think
hard.
that's what.
Okay.
However, from a developer and builder perspective, we're realists too, but I think the fact that we're at least talking about it is encouraging because we're not the only jurisdiction that's struggling with this problem.
No, the whole country is struggling with it. Yeah.
And, you and I talked,
We talked this morning.
We don't
Yes.
just want it to be multifamily apartments.
Yeah.
We want, some variety. And today we have no opportunity, there's not, one of the best things they talked about was test cases. Don't know how to do them, but a test case would really be nice in terms of trying to prove, or this is going to evolve, not be a duplex, be something else, be Joe Rudder's, invention, be something else. But we're not even trying it, so.
Thank you, Mr. Harvey. And Mr. Rudder, I can tell you are waiting to have a few words here.
All right, so why don't you weigh in, and then we'll shift back to Mr. Youngman for a
Okay,
round. Thank you.
First of all, let me clarify, I have not built a house in Howard County ever. I was in the family in 1955 when my parents built the house in Howard County, and I had a house built for me, but I do not build houses. I don't manage construction, so I am not a developer, even though I get tagged with that dirty word all the time. What I do after my 40 years on the government side, where at a time when residents of the county, longtime residents of the county, had property and they wanted to go in and develop it. They went to an engineer, they hired an engineer, they paid the engineer, he submitted the plans, they had no idea what was going on. They just signed things every once in a while, and then a Bruce or Jason comes along and develops the property by building the infrastructure and building the houses. The folks that I work with today are those same people reaching my age, many of them not a whole lot younger, but younger. There are not many much older that are doing their estate planning. And they put their 10-acre property or 20-acre property and say, this is what we want to do, and all the developers come in and make offers. And they go, I have no idea if Bruce is the guy, or Jason's the guy, or Dave is the guy. Who do I? So they come to me, and I look. I'm not picking my buds here. I help them understand why the proposals are what they are. And you mentioned this chart, and we've all looked at the chart. I'm not going to nitpick the numbers in it. They're old. There's things like assumptions on permit fees. It's a simple, straightforward line. Just the school fee is significantly more than the total permit fees that they've assumed here. Interest rates that they would have assumed in 2021 are nothing like what you have today.
So we're talking about, for the public, we're talking about a chart on page 69 of a report that has been used throughout the general plan, and that was created by RCLCO.
Yeah, and the bottom line of the chart is saying, if I'm going to build an MIHU unit within my single-family detached subdivision, the land has to be free.
That's pretty much what this chart
Well,
says.
they say
That's
they
just
say
about
it-
what this chart
They say
says.
you can only pay
$1,000.
They
Yeah,
say you can pay
they said you can pay
$1,000.
$1,000.
But just the school fees Or
If they were accurate on this chart, the government would have to pay you. That's
To
Mr.
incentivize
Harvey
the
nods,
creation.
yes, yeah.
Unfortunately, what happens is, the folks that I work with that have had the property, raised their kids, been here for 50 years, that are trying to do their estate planning, don't understand that when they do the math, or they call planning and zoning and say, okay, I have a piece of property that is zoned RSC and it's 10 acres, and they say, well, you get 40 units. Okay, well, I get numbers and I start looking at it. Well, you know, you've got the forest in here, so you're not quite going to get 40, or you've got a little piece of stream or wetland. It's not really 40, it's more like 30. Okay, now how much am I going to get per lot? I see the lots are selling for $200,000, $400,000. Is that what I'm going to get? And he's like, no. He's got to make a predictability, which is what we don't have in Howard County anymore. I have to tell him to assume if you go into contract with a developer, he's got to prepare to spend a lot of money getting from the first community meetings up to an approved preliminary plan for whatever the number of units are. That's about 2 years. Then he takes the test. And if he fails the school test, I have to assume that I can stay there for 6 years because it was recently changed from 5 to 6. So I'm now 8 years into the process, and then I got another year, year and a half to get the final plans done, that I have a marketable lot. You can be down at Arundel Mills there at Live Casino and have better chances of getting an exact number than when I'm assuming that this builder who's going to buy this has got to project what is the situation going to be 10 years from now when I'm investing all this money. So
the question is, are people going to be able, in your opinion, do you think that these builders are going to be able to build what is being called affordable housing and apparently called missing middle housing throughout this general plan? That's the question.
when it comes to implementing, two different questions. The first one was the moderate income housing. I don't know any of the folks that are on the Housing Commission now or what the situation is today. I can tell you 20 years ago, they wanted the fee because they could invest that in houses that were being, older houses that were being refurbished, buying townhouses. They could serve a much larger population than coming out in a new development of $1 million houses. And I'm going to put, I have 100 units, $1 million a piece, and I'm going to scatter 10 units in there, my 10%, that are going to sell for $4. They're not going to look compatible with the $1 million units. They're not going to be the same size as the $1 million units. And the lots are selling for $400,000. Why? How am I going to put a house that sells for $260,000? So the fee makes sense to be there as the option where it can be better utilized. But I just encourage you to talk to the Housing Commission. The affordable part of the accessory or missing middle.
No, yeah, missing middle.
Missing middle is much of the county that was developed 60s and 70s was R20. They were 20,000 square foot lots. R20 today is 14. That's what you get because you cluster and do the open space and all that sort of thing. Those older communities have plenty of room to build what you used examples of like an accessory garage with a second floor to it and so forth that would be a rental that could go out and fit there. What you hear from the community is, well, our roads are narrow and we can't take the additional traffic. Well, that's why they go slower on your roads in those old developments because they're only 20 feet wide and not 24 foot where you feel comfortable to go in 60 mile an hour.
Okay, Mr. Rudder, do you see this opportunity to build a missing middle, not the accessory dwellings, but, sort of buying the land and building these duplexes for this amount, this moderate income here in Howard County? That's the question.
I think there are opportunities in older neighborhoods. I worked with several folks in the North Laurel area that were High Ridge Meadows and those developments there. There are a lot of those properties that are 2 or 3 acres with an old house on it, where you could subdivide it and build some smaller units, and they're not out of scale with what's in the community already.
And how much would that 2 or 3 acre piece of property cost? And how much would you be able to sell those houses for? And how much would you be able to make? What kind of profit would you make as a developer if you did that? And would it be worth a developer's while? That's the question.
I will say, and I'll let you answer, it's just that we've gone on for about 20 minutes on this one question. And I really want to make sure that Mr. Youngman gets a chance to.
I'll answer quickly. In Elkridge and in the North Laurel area, there are many properties that are just a couple of acres. If the owner can get some revenue off of it without a subdivision process that takes 9 years and is very unpredictable, that, am I going to have, you could do it and make it an attractive, affordable way to get infill housing if that was the policy, and the procedures were there in the law to help make that work.
So we can do it.
You can do it if you want to.
We can do it. It's possible.
It's possible if you want it.
I mean, I think it's simple math. If that 2 acres today supposedly gets 4, but it really only get 3, because it's R20 or whatever, or maybe it only gets 2, and then he gets, because there's some other mechanism to get 6, you're going to get a more affordable, I mean, it's only in policy. Maybe you can't fit 6, all these other things.
It's about density.
Yeah.
It gets back to density.
Division.
Really.
It definitely gets to putting more on, I mean, it's more on less.
All right.
Right.
Mr. Youngman?
I'm not really going to move on. Talking about more on less, and, the general plan talks about it, the presentations talked about it, you guys talked about it, like land is obviously an issue. To what extent, and I'm not talking about the school surcharge and some of these things that are like just dollars, but the other land constrictions that just in the last 4 years, we've blown the doors off of. Forest Con and a lot of these other things that take an already scarce thing, which is land, and dramatically restrict what you can put on it. To what extent is that compounding this problem? And are we looking at a general plan that says we're going to do these 2 things and they're just going to continue to fight each other?
You got it. That's it.
Well, and I think, just to kind of, because Jason's going to answer this question, but even more, you talk about the last 4 years, but what's so hard is it is the last 4 years, and it came at us fast, and we didn't even know what we were doing. So now Jason can answer what it's done, and we don't even know all the impacts.
Because you have more coming from the state now. Like,
Correct.
we haven't
I mean,
even fully brought in the old the Forest Con that just
We-
passed, and
we
now
were-
we're redoing it again.
We
So-
were talking, the stormwater management regs were issued in 2010. They really only have been implemented in full in the last 5 to 6 years.
Right.
So we're only beginning to know what those costs are. So
I'm sorry, I interrupted your handoff.
I mean, I completely agree with what Bruce is saying here, and the kind of the shorter career I've had than these gentlemen has been a major change over the amount of regulation, both from the actual site constraint side that we're talking about, but also from the process side, the length of time, the unpredictability, the difficulty getting through Apfo regulations, and having that, all the predictability around that. And that also adds to whether we are able to make the choice to go offer somebody price for their property and feel assured that we're going to be able to execute on that. So when Bruce says you see a forested site, you almost say, yeah, no, that we're not even going to bother with that.
I've had clients
and that is very much in play now.
Don't even bother.
That is very much in play, and that overall, we're not building the units that we did earlier in my career. I mean, we had, I think, 571 units last year, something along those lines. And that's a very low number compared to what our goals have been through the allocation chart. And that is that's been kind of our development goals from our last general plan, was to meet certain building permits per year, and we've underperformed that. And it's getting worse as we go year by year.
Well, I don't think it's necessarily an amend the general plan type thing, as it is, it's instructive for us to look at this document, and all we keep hearing about is affordability, affordability, affordability. We need to get more things on less land, or more things on the land we have, yet we've spent 4 years through policy creating a situation where we can get less and less and less on the land, almost forcing the vertical. Like, it's great that we've talked a lot about these types of duplexes, triplexes, and those things, and I think those things sound great, but there's still a limit to what you can get on an 8-acre site that's wooded, that you're going to get creamed on forest con, there's a stream, you're going to cream that setback, you're going to pay $35,000 a house in school surcharge. So then the government's created all this lack of affordability, won't let the market create affordability, so then we've now got to come in and subsidize affordability. And that's what's upside down about the whole general plan, I feel like. And frankly, a lot of the stuff we've done as a body in the last 4 years.
And one difficulty I'd add when we talk about going vertical is that the cost increases that we've seen, the interest rate increases we've seen, and we're not going to return down to 3% interest rates anytime soon. All of that, it makes it more expensive to go vertical, and you get to a point where it's not affordable doing that either, to get the density that you're trying to get, and so you're squeezed down on density just from a cost standpoint.
So you really, while there's a lot of these policy things we can do and levers we can move to help a little bit, ultimately to create affordability is going to rely on subsidy and the government to reduce the cost to the consumer of the cost of housing that we have raised the cost of through a lot of policies that we've done. So thanks, guys.
I mean, I think I would fundamentally disagree that the only way is subsidy, because currently when you look at, if you did a single-family detached development right now, or say you did townhouse development, townhouse is a better example of this, those costs are actually borne by the other residents. When you are, I would presume, when you're doing, what we have now is inclusionary zoning, but it's working against what we offer. So you don't have any opportunity to add a unit or two to make up for the units that you're selling at a lower rate. So currently, that cost is actually borne by our consumers. So there's different ways that we can actually create that aren't subsidies, that are actually market-based solutions. Which is not the question I wanted to ask.
Right.
Unfortunately.
And there are. It comes back down to density. But again,
Right.
there is this concept, and nobody can say we haven't done this, that the reason why we have to squeeze the lot's this big, and now you're allowed to build on this much of it because of policy that we've created. So now, to sort of reverse that, or to offset that, we've got to let you build a lot more in this. And that's, and that's where you're getting out of, you're in R20, and all of a sudden I've got tiny little lots, and, that's just, it's like we're creating the problem and then we're looking for ways to solve it, I guess, may be the way that I.
Yes, that is
Yeah.
actually, but since I did not know that you three would be here, and I really appreciate that you're here, and thank you to Ms. Young for inviting.
I think they were on the work session list, weren't they?
Yeah, nope,
I
they're
didn't
there.
know either, and I was very.
They're right here.
All right, okay, all right.
seen it.
No, I'm not, I wasn't
it's 'cause
saying
I
you,
didn't
I'm just-
read.
I'm
It was
saying me.
on an attachment that came out
Okay,
4 weeks
yes.
Yes,
ago.
no, you're-
But then your current agenda.
No,
didn't
you're
have it.
on here.
Okay.
It's my oversight.
All right.
I'm just simply saying that I'd prepared more questions for RCLCO, and I want to get to them, because I feel that you are all quite accessible if we were to reach out, to answer questions. But I guess the
Even in the gym. That's where I saw Mr. Harvey this morning at 7:30 a.m. Just pat ourselves on our
good for
backs.
both of you. I mean, it goes to what Mr. Youngman was talking about, but would you agree that our current regulations incentivize large, single-family detached home development?
Yes.
You can just give me a one-word answer, actually.
If it is a one-word answer.
Large, single-family detached homes. I guess I'll say yes, because of the zoning that's archaic in my mind.
Yeah, well, and even school surcharge fees with inflation riders, that also incentivizes large, single-family detached, which then ironically send more children to schools. Mr. Van Kirk?
I mean, it really is based on the zoning. We're a predominantly single-family zoned county, and that's on relatively large lots. Even when they're 14,000 square feet, you can fit very large houses on those types of lots. And then the demand comes in, and people are demanding those types of houses in the market.
Right, like Ryan Homes built a lot of homes in Columbia in the original time, and they don't really offer that model anymore as an option.
Right.
They're still building homes in our community.
That was Ryland Homes, by the way.
Oh, you're right, I'm sorry.
And they're an L&R, so
Thank you for that, I
You would
appreciate
remember.
that.
I worked for Ryland, so I.
Okay.
Thank you. I'll go to Ms. Young next, and then start with RCLCO on the return back.
Well, this is, and I guess this is for maybe RCLCO and maybe also for our panel here and also for the general plan individuals. There's so much discussion in this general plan about, only 25% of the people who live here work here, and 75% of the people drive out. They drive out. They drive out. Like that's, and admittedly, that's not good for the environment because it means that there's more cars in transit, and that's more CO emissions. And I'm, agree that that's not a good thing. On the other hand, we don't tell people who can and can't move here. And I can't help but assume, since such a small percentage of people, 25%, actually live here and work here, that there was another reason why people moved to Howard County. And I think most of us believe that that reason is our school district, that it wasn't because of business that they were coming to work at or some other aspect of that, or that the reason why they drive outside of Howard County is it's a couple and one goes one direction and the other goes in the other direction. And Howard County is unbelievably convenient for couples who both work and who go in different directions. And I don't think those two things are ever, I hope the first one never goes away, and I know the second one is never going to go away because that's just where we're geographically located. So I don't see in the future Howard County ever really changing that aspect too much. The working, all the people who live here actually working here. And particularly the two of you, you're in the business of selling homes. So I'm curious what you see when people buy homes. Are those some of the reasons why you're seeing people, and you've been in this business for a long time. I mean, is that why people were moving to Howard County?
Well, I think, first off, it's obvious people move here for their children and for their schools. That's number one.
Yay, thank you.
I do, I don't meet every customer, but I do see change happening in that, the people that I don't see driving like this as the standard anymore. I see, now we're selling a lot of professionals, doctors. I see, NSA, I see APL, I see hospital,
Right.
hospital, lots of
Yeah.
doctors. And they're not driving to whatever the one is down Silver Spring, and they're not driving to Mercy Hospital. Some of them are.
Mm-hmm.
But we're seeing, at least for today, a much more kind of localness than we saw in the past. And the other thing that, of course, is happening is I work from home for 3 days a week.
Right. That's a
So,
good thing. That's a really good thing.
So I do think we'll probably have a lot of what's in the plan, but I think it's changing some. That's just my perception.
And just as one more little follow-up, did Williamsburg Homes, do they have a big office, and now they've contracted as a result, or?
We're just a small little company, so we've been in the
Okay.
Harper's Choice Village Center for God knows how long, since the early 90s. So
Okay,
in a small 5,000, 6,000 square foot office.
all right. Okay, and what about you?
One thing about that percentage number is that we are a very, very small county compared to the counties around us.
Yes, we are.
So we travel a shorter distance to be outside the county for that work than
That's true,
somebody who lives
too.
in the center of Anne Arundel County.
That's
And so
true,
that-
I hadn't
I don't
thought
know
about
how
it
that
that way.
impacts where the numbers are. I'm sure a statistician could kind of try to regulate that a little bit to see how that is. So we don't have to travel as far. We see buyers, an enormous amount of buyers that are NSA related, Fort Meade, and they are technically just outside the county, but it's
True.
not very far.
That is true, they're just down 30, maybe we shouldn't even
Yes.
say that out loud. They're just down a major highway here, yes.
Right.
Yeah.
I do think that the measure that taking that measurement is important. I mean, we as a county want job growth, and housing is where jobs go to sleep at night. And so you have to recognize that in your policy making as we try to promote economic development, and that economic development is not just jobs, but it's also providing that housing for that workforce.
Yeah, and right now I don't know, I guess it's 75% of the people then must drive in. I don't remember what the driving in part was, but I do remember what the driving out part. And what about schools? Is that what you're still getting, is that a lot of people are moving here because of the schools?
Absolutely. Many people move here because of schools. I do think that the county has great services and other things that the outdoor spaces, the parks and things are. We're a very
It's a
special
full-service county,
in terms
yes.
of the around. So I think all of those things combined, absolutely.
Okay.
Mr. Youngman?
I don't have anything more for these guys, so if anybody wants to.
My next one's for our Cialto.
Just one last thought on the employment commuting. One of the underpinnings of the older general plans was to have a jobs housing balance, because once you get this far out of balance, that's why the roads are so congested. It doesn't matter to people in Howard County that live in your district
Yeah.
that they're going to NSA or to Fort Meade. Fort Meade inside the fence has 50,000 jobs, 50,000 employees. inside
Actually,
the
our
fence.
Department of Transportation tells us always that the reason why our roads are so congested is because of all the through traffic, people who don't live or work in
That's
Howard
95
County.
that you see going
Because they
to
like our
Baltimore.
29, they like our 32, they like our 70, and that we can't keep them off our roads.
So we did have EDA present to us that 20,000 people commute into Howard County every day more than commute out of Howard County. So we have 20,000 additional cars coming in than we do commuting out. So
And, yeah, we were the trying to do to, not through. And
That
that's,
would, yeah,
that's not
that's
the
not
case
happening.
anymore.
Yeah.
Thank you. All right, Mr. Youngman. All right, you gentlemen may enjoy your evening.
Wait,
Oh.
are you letting them go? I did want to,
Okay, or you can stay and then,
yeah.
It's fine with me.
Okay.
Got these guys here.
Okay, so there was one more place on this RL Co. report that, not just that chart, but that there's an entire report. Have you seen that? You were on vacation. You were really kind to come back in here, actually. That was a heavy lift, yeah.
Well, I got back this week.
Yeah, okay, that was kind. Anyway, there was another, on page 59, so this is with the general plan. If you go on to, our website, you'll see it. It talks about what is recommended, I guess, based on the first 58 pages of all of the surveys and the information that they gave out and everything else that you would see in this RL Co. report. They then say, this is what we need to do here in Howard County. For workforce families and market rate families, we need to allow for greater quantity and diversity of homes to be supplied by the market. That's you guys, you're the market. Okay? Develop a greater diversity of housing, including small lot and single-story homes. Is anybody building single-story homes anymore? Like ranchers?
We are in the 55 plus.
In the 55 plus. Where is that? 55 plus is always looking for single-story homes.
I mean, it's down in Fulton, and
Okay.
Fulton's building them across the street from Maple Lawn, and I'm building them a mile and a half down the road. But
Okay, single-story
some
for
not all
55.
Single-story living, they often have a second floor.
Yeah,
They are
right,
single-floor living.
right. I got it, right. But they're actually 2 stories. Yeah,
And they could be 3 with a finished basement as well.
I've seen that. That's what I've seen a lot of. Okay. And then it says accessible units, accessory dwelling units, 55 plus communities, preserving existing garden-style rental apartments, which are generally older and more affordable. I don't know if any of you have strong feelings about preserving garden-style apartments, or if you've ever built them, or if there's a reason to do that. No opinion. Okay.
Well, there's a number of projects in Columbia that are older now and are the garden style. Town and Country, when you put all the pieces of that together, there's probably close to 1,000 units in there that some of the stuff from the late 60s needs some facelift, but I would certainly not want to lose that housing opportunity for
Right,
doing some single-family houses in there.
right. No,
So
and no,
there-
this report says to
It's
preserve
kind of
it.
hidden, but, well, even here on Courthouse Drive, you had, the redevelopment of the one project, but Venus Gardens and those kind of projects are much older and can provide a very needed housing supply.
We own garden apartments.
you do?
in the county. So I mean, they are maybe not newer than what the age of what Joe's talking about, but I mean, we absolutely see those assets as important in our housing stock of the county, and certainly a great asset to manage and keep improved and have as a nice place for people to live.
So you're not going to get rid of them?
No.
Okay, good. All right. Okay, and then on page 66, the RL Co. report says that there's an outsized demand for single-family detached new construction in Columbia, and then pointed out that prices for new construction were double the sales of other Columbia homes. So new construction in Columbia, like if somebody was building new in Columbia, and I was trying to think, who is building new? And yeah, that was sort of my thought.
Cornerstone on a Vollmerhausen Drive, they did 8.
Okay.
Yeah,
I
they were-
think the
it
sample
was-
size is too small.
I-
You've got that.
No, it's the only one I could think
You
of.
got
But everybody in my neighborhood,
the
a lot
old
of people in my
nursery
neighborhood
on
wanted to move to the new
Tamar.
ones, so they could stay in the
Grandfather's
neighborhood.
nursery.
Or not Tamar, yeah, Grandfather's Nursery,
Grandfather's.
so you pay
Yeah.
what, $900,000? Like,
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, those are massive.
Okay.
if you got 50 single-family detached new homes in Columbia in an entire year, that's gonna
I can't even
skew-
imagine there were
Not
that
even
many.
that much. That's,
Yeah,
I think that
but
that's a tough stat.
Custom builds off like Audubon and stuff.
yeah, but I guess RCLCO thought that that meant that there was an outsized demand for single-family detached new construction in Columbia because the prices were so much higher than the resales. That was their point. So if a resale, I guess, was 450,000 and a new construction was 900, that shows the demand. Is that, would you,
I
would
mean,
you
again,
agree
we're-
with that, or do you think that
everything is-
that's too
Everything
simplistic?
is a little bit skewed because we have very little new housing and very little resale housing. But in general, 100% higher, or whatever that math is, 50% higher. What we've definitely seen that increase over the since 2008. And some of that is because obviously codes change and you build to a much higher spec as you build new versus what's even 10 years ago. So, in general, it's about 20% is kind of the factor that most of us see. It can be as high as 30, 50% higher is not typical.
That's not typical. Okay.
It has to do with the time in between of when that house you're comparing to the new construction. When you're saying the 20%, that's oftentimes something you see, okay, well, that's a 10 or 15-year-old community. Here's the new one, and you'll see that 20%. You're talking about much bigger ranges, and so what that product is very different than what that new product is.
Right, that's what I would have thought. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you all very much for coming out tonight, answering questions, thinking through these issues with us, and being a part of this. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, Mr. Youngman, back to you.
Welcome back, everybody. Something jumped out at me, which was the concept of co-locating residential on county land, county property where we have county buildings. Did I read that right? So are we condoing that, or is the county getting in the landlord or developer business? How do you see that panning out?
Yeah, so that was a recommendation that came out of the Housing Opportunities Master Plan, and specifically what the action is to evaluate opportunities to co-locate income-restricted housing and community facilities on county-owned land. So I don't know if that would necessarily mean that the county would be a landlord, or if there would be, a set of maybe I don't.
So it's like the Columbia projects. It's, the housing commission owns the property or the county owns the property, and, we're running a rec center or a fire station and they're owning the housing. Is that what we're talking about?
That could be a scenario.
Okay.
Ms. Kendall, is RCLCO on virtually?
Yes, Jake Ross.
Hi,
Hi.
Mr. Ross. Hello, welcome, and thank you for your attendance.
Thank you.
I wanted to start with, I guess in your study, it's page 12, which sort of talks about the shrinking household sizes and how they've impacted housing preferences across the country. Our marriage rates have declined, our birth rates are declining across the country, and then additionally, we also have a situation where we have we have more young adults living with their parents than any other time in recent history. So I'm really wondering how sort of how these two square up and how we can meet these sort of changing demographic needs in our community.
Sure. I think a lot of this gets back to one of the overarching themes of the Housing Opportunities Master Plan, which was that point of greater amount and diversity of housing. The reason being that, as you mentioned, it's not just the household sizes that are smaller, it's also people staying at home longer, it's people waiting to get married, people waiting to have children. That's changed the dynamic in terms of the types of housing that people look for. And so whereas you might have had people in their late 20s, early 30s typically looking to settle down in large single-family detached homes because they were getting ready to have kids, people are putting off that decision longer, if not entirely in some cases. And those households aren't necessarily the ones that are looking for those same types of housing. And that's resulting in a lot more demand for whether it's apartments because they like the flexibility, condos because they like the lifestyle, townhomes for the same reason. It's just resulting in a broader range of demand than what places across this country have seen previously.
Thank you very much. Mr. Youngman?
My next question was, I want to talk about the trust fund and that stuff. Do you guys want to stay on this report since you have them on?
I have questions.
That's fine. I mean, because then we can cut them loose at the break or something. Yeah, that's fine.
Sure, Mr. Ross would appreciate that. All right, Ms. Young?
Okay. So on, I think it was page 5, it was stated that Howard County has less housing than it needs across all household types and income bands. And I thought that was an interesting statement because all we keep hearing and reading in the general plan is that we need more affordable housing. We need more affordable housing, which presumably is moderate and low income housing. And yet RCLCO said that we need more housing across all household types and income bands. And I would like to know how did you conclude that?
Sure. I wish I had a chart in front of me. I'm trying to find it in the report right now. But one of the things that we did was we looked at a comparison of housing and supply by AMI band across Howard County. And one of the things that jumped out in particular was the mismatch at the low income, at the very low income segments, but also at the market rate segments, where the lack of housing at price points even above 120% of AMI relative to the number of households that fell in that category means that you have a lot of those households introducing more competition for moderate income, low income households that need those housing units. And sometimes those high income households, those market rate households are choosing to underspend on housing because they want to save money, but in a lot of cases it's because they can't find a housing unit in the neighborhood they want or that offers the type of amenities that they want. And because of that, they're choosing to occupy a unit that might be technically beneath their means if you're looking at incomes, but fits their needs. And that's because there isn't a new housing unit that does the same. And what that does is it leads to significantly more competition for the people that need those units.
So I noticed there were a number of statements like this throughout the RCLCO report. And I'm wondering, and again, just like the general plan, I never saw any real nod to the fact that Howard County is the second smallest geographically speaking, county in the state of Maryland. And 40% of our land in this small county is preserved or does not have public water or sewer. So does that, and we just had some people who are very involved in the development community, 2 of whom are developers, talk about the land constraints. And I'm wondering if your company considered that at all when you all said over and over again that we needed more housing and there wasn't enough.
Absolutely. I think the way I would distinguish it is that, we try to see demand separately from some of the constraints that might limit the ability to accommodate it. Mm-hmm. And so we recognize, of course, that there's things that might be in place, whether it's natural things like open space, whether it's zoning regulations. We recognize that there can be barriers to meeting the demand that there might be. But our forecast that we did was based on what the market if the market could build what there was demand for, what would that number be? And one of the aspects of the general plan is to grapple with the best way to weigh that alongside some of the other needs and desires for the county.
And is there any thought that because of the geography of Howard County and its lack of size, that we actually might have almost all the housing we could fit into Howard County? Whether there's demand for it or not, I mean, there's demand for housing, I'm sure, in places where there's no more housing. Manhattan. I don't know. There are places, there are places where people want to live and there just aren't enough places to live. And usually it's because of geographic constraints.
Right, and that could very well be the case. And if that's the case, a lot of that is a supply issue versus a demand issue. And in places like Manhattan, like you mentioned, but also lots of other places where you are supply constrained in that way, whether from a policy standpoint or from a geographic standpoint, those are the places where you see rising affordability issues. And that's one of the reasons why the plan sought to really think about what would that demand be that would help address those issues, because that's when demand exceeds supply in that way, that's where you start to see rising prices, rising rents, to the extent that not just Howard County, but lots of communities across this country have. Right.
That's, again, a nationwide problem. And we didn't really go into that with our earlier panel, but I understand that part of the housing crisis in terms of not having enough of it also has to do with market forces that I guess also are not recognized either by the general plan or by your report here, and that is the supply of goods, whether it's lumber or cement or glass, and in particular labor, and that the number of laborers in the construction industry, which actually is noted in your report, where it shows that labor industry has actually gone down over the last 40 years, that those aspects of building in the building industry have had a major impact too.
Right, they have as well, but I think that we also, a big factor as well is, the ability of the market to actually provide the housing that there's demand for. I think we've seen across the country evidence to suggest that, in places where there are restrictive housing policies, you see higher price escalations regardless of some of the other factors going on at play. And on the opposite end, we've also seen evidence from jurisdictions like Minneapolis is a good example, but there's others across the country as well that have loosened some of those restrictions on the ability for development to take place and have seen more moderate rent and price appreciation than other places. And so I think all of these factors are at play, but some policy is definitely a factor as well.
Well, have you been following what's going on in Minneapolis?
I'm aware.
And have you taken note of whether or not there have been many of this these missing middle homes built since they changed the zoning in Minneapolis?
I'm not aware of the exact numbers of homes that have been built, but I'm aware of the policy changes that they've made, as well as some of the barriers that continue to be in the way towards building some of those homes.
Right. So we don't really know yet whether or not this experiment in Minneapolis is going to be successful because, for all we know, they're charging more money for these half houses than they were for the original houses when the single family detached houses when they were initially built.
I mean, housing costs, if you build a house in 1950, it's going to be a very different cost than today, especially with different codes. But these are also things that have been done in Austin, other places. Washington State, Snohomish County has had cottage communities for decades. I've found documents going back to 2001. I don't know. It's definitely, we're not on an island here. And I appreciate that you haven't necessarily gone out and created something totally new that's never been done elsewhere. So I appreciate that you have, really worked to do tried and tested methods throughout the country. Mr. Ross, I wanted to get back to our jobs and housing imbalance, which I think might be the worst in Maryland, or at least our surrounding jurisdiction. What happens if we continue this trend, or if we encourage job creation without the creation of housing?
So I think there's two risks. I think the first is that people that come here because they want to live close to work or have a short commute are willing to spend more and more money to do so, and the households with means to do that are the ones that are going to win out in that regard, and it leads to further price escalations. On the opposite end, I think from an employment perspective, one of the risks in failing to accommodate people who do want to live near the places where they work is that's something that companies are valuing more and more these days. Even since the pandemic, with people being able to work remotely more frequently, companies
Mr. Ross?
are still considering.
Sorry, actually, would you,
Yes.
have you seen any evidence that employees also prefer shorter commutes?
Yeah, yes, I
Sure.
have to look back at exactly where the studies are.
Well,
I don't think that's is that a question?
I think that there have been questions
well,
about
Mr.
whether
Ross
that's
was talking about the
intentional.
employer desire to have local employees, and we've had this discussion where people may prefer to live in Washington County if they're only commuting, once or twice. And so I just felt it was important to really understand the trends of what we're seeing. So, and that means if employees don't want to commute far, then our employers will lose out. But please continue, Mr. Ross. I'm sorry for the interruption.
It's okay. And I was just going to add to in a similar line of thought that the employers when employees can't locate near the places where they work, it's a risk from an employer retention and attraction standpoint, because now more than ever, with companies really, really wanting people back in the office, it's a factor that they're considering. And when people can't afford to live near the places that they work, or can't find a housing unit where they can, that's a factor at play. And that's the risk from an employer perspective, is that Howard County is a great place to live, has always been, but loses some of that competitive advantage in that regard.
Thank you for explaining those risks. I appreciate it.
On page 20 of the RC LoCo report, there is a map showing household assistance. And I don't know if RC also looked at the general plan's location of activity centers. Did you do that? Or was that not part of that was not part of their, okay, then this question is for you all. Because my question then is, how do these low-income census tracts line up with the activity centers and the other areas that are designated as growth centers in HOCO by design? And did the HOCO by design team do an assessment of these housing types by census tracts to identify opportunities for housing diversification, socioeconomic diversification, and racial diversification?
The identification of the activity centers, specifically, we're looking at areas that have the potential for redevelopment, and specifically looking at these shopping center locations that might be able to redevelop at a parcel size that could accommodate a mix of uses. So I did want to address something that was being discussed a little bit earlier. So we heard that RCLCO projected about a 31,000 residential unit demand. So then what happens throughout the process is then we took that projection and we said, okay, well, throughout this general plan process, where could that demand go, right? And then that's when we modeled potential growth opportunities within these specifically activity centers through the redevelopment of multifamily communities and then through infill opportunities both in the east and the west. So within all of those areas, that's where we modeled opportunities to accommodate this future growth potential, future residential potential. So I just did want to address that was modeled. And then when we looked at specifically where these activity centers could go, no, we did not look at whether or not what the socioeconomic, what the income brackets were, the socioeconomic data associated with the census tracts, where those redevelopment areas are. So, but within those redevelopment areas we are pointing out that there are opportunities for all types of housing. That is exactly what the plan says, that there should certainly be, we should be accommodating opportunities for low to moderate income households, but it shouldn't exclusively be low moderate income households. We should be facilitating mixed income communities for all age types. And that leads me to another point is, well, who wants to live in Howard County in the future? It's not just a place, yes, we have great schools, people move here for the schools. Yes, it's a place for convenience, but it's also a place for older adults to continue to age in place to stay in this county. And a lot of young adults want to live here, and we heard that throughout the process. So I hope I answered your question.
I do find that some of the things that you say in the general plan about not concentrating certain incomes in one place and then recommending that those activity centers go in that exact place, which is the densification of a parking lot, does sort of seem to contradict what the idea is behind trying to look outside of certain areas where the concentration of poverty has been built up in Howard County.
Yeah, I mean, respectfully, I don't see how we are, by locating those activity centers there, I don't see how that increases concentrations of poverty when the activity centers are intended to be multi-generational communities and mixed income communities. So there will be, there's intended to be opportunities for people at all income brackets.
Well, that was also the case in a very recent redevelopment that's going on right now in Columbia, which has not occurred.
Oh, I actually got the unit mix, and there is affordable units in there. They are being retained.
Market rate.
No. Affordable.
Yeah.
It's,
No. But that's not what I'm talking about.
Right. It's 52 market rate, 43 80% AMI and below, and 58 50% AMI and below.
As I said, that was not what I was told.
Okay. I'm just letting you know that you told me that, and so I
Yeah.
followed up, and this is the information.
Yeah.
Should be
That's great if that's true, but that was not the information I was told previously.
Okay. Well, that is
So,
the most
and-
up-to-date information.
I'm still not sure how that occurs either. I mean, do you say you can only have a certain number of low income, moderate income? You have to have a mix with, you have to have missing middle housing. You have to have a certain amount of housing that can be purchased. You have to have a certain amount of multi-unit apartment buildings. I'm trying to picture how that occurs, that we tell the developer that's how this has to happen.
Well, so there would have to be first for certain activity centers, we have to create the right zoning regulation, right? So they're intended to be a mix of uses, and zoning regulations dictate, they inform what the density will look like. They inform what the housing unit mix could look like. I mean, it just depends. Now, when we get into Gateway and the master planning process, I think we are going to be looking pretty deeply into what that housing mix will be and what the desirable income units that are affordable, different income brackets will be, similar to what was done for the Downtown Columbia master plan. Did you want to add anything to that? Or?
Yeah, I think the difficulty in answering this question as forthright as you would like is that the activity centers are so varied, and so we can't give you an exact answer that covers all of them because they are all going to have a different type of mix. But as Mary said, the zoning and the regulations are going to encourage that diversity of housing type, and it'll be at different price points because we also have different affordable housing programs in the county that will affect those areas as well.
Were there any final questions for Mr. Ross? I did have one final one. Mr. Ross, I was wondering, trying to figure out how to frame this, but there's been a lot of turmoil the past few years, I guess I'd say, the last 5. And it would be helpful to hear how your trends have changed, what updates you've seen, and sort of what changes you've seen in markets like ours, given the pandemic, given a lot of changes that we've all lived through.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny you asked that. I was actually curious just because a lot of the data in this report was looked at 2-3 years ago. Mm-hmm. And so I was curious, and so I looked up really what the rent growth, the price appreciation in Howard County has been. And the numbers that I saw were that apartment rents today are 22% higher than they were in Q2 2020 when this report was done. And median sales prices are 32% higher than they were at that time, which I think really underscores the point that we were trying to make in this report as far as the importance of addressing some of these affordability challenges, because it's an issue across this country, but those numbers are also a lot higher than we see in other places across this country, which tells us it's even more important to act.
I'm sorry, I just wanted to make sure I wrote those down. Could you repeat them again, and the date points of
Sure,
the rent and purchase prices and how much they've increased from when?
It was 22.3% higher today than they were in Q2 2020, and that's apartment rents. And then median sales prices were 32.4% higher than they were in Q2 2020.
I am both glad and depressed that I've asked you that question. So, thank you.
Good question.
It's just a very depressing answer.
Yeah.
Thank you. Should we let Mr. Ross? Or unless, if there's anything that you think is relevant for him to survey, but. Okay.
Yeah, he can start. Sorry, Mr. Ross.
Lucky you, you're virtual though. All right. Well, why don't we go back to Mr. Youngman then, and we'll start with a fresh round.
I guess this in general, I mean, it's like an affordable housing type, trust fund type question. Should Kelly come up or anybody? Like, it's 2 questions built into one, so I'll try to keep it short. The general plan referred to a trust fund. I don't know if it's the same trust fund we have or a different trust fund or whatever. One of the reasons why some of us have gotten hung up on the trust fund we have has been sort of the lack of our ability to provide oversight on how it's spent. Has there been any discussion of creating, some type of fund that's similar to that, but that has some sort of governance? Where the county executive and the county council put a group of 6 people together or 7 people together, and they look at the different projects and look at the different opportunities and ways to invest in projects. So it's not having to come to us as a political body all the time, but it's accountable to at least a group of people that we've all sort of put in place to do that. Has there been any discussion about that?
So within the general plan, no, we did not discuss what the oversight might be for the Housing Opportunities Trust Fund, just that we suggest we continue to support the one that we have, the Housing Opportunities Trust Fund, and explore the feasibility of establishing a dedicated funding source. So I don't know if Ms. Semino would like to speak more
Have you
specifically.
guys ever talked about anything like that?
Well, we have.
And I don't mean for the part of it you use for settlement down
No,
payment
no,
and
I
that
know,
kind of stuff,
I know.
but for the projects.
Right. So I don't know if you recall, but the county executive did appoint an advisory committee of 7 members from all the different districts. So there is an advisory committee that
But
reviewed
he
the
appointed
application.
them all.
Well, that's true.
So
but,
like, okay, got it.
but they are from the 5 different districts.
Right.
But there is an advisory committee who reviewed the applications for the first $5 million.
Mm-hmm.
And they were scheduled to review scheduled to prepare an application for the second 10 million and then review those applications. So right now it's in contingency and we're still talking about what are next steps. Ms. Young has fortunately met with us and given some ideas about how she would like to see the trust fund move forward. We're meeting with some other council members as well. So what the general plan talks about is having a trust fund. Also talk about what the advocates have asked for many years is a dedicated source of funding for a trust fund. What we're saying here, and you've heard it from our developers, these projects, I don't call them subsidies, but I do call them government contributions. Investments in housing for our residents. But that the reality of having projects that include affordable housing units without government contributions is not going to happen. And so a trust fund, the MIHU fee and lieu fund, those things being able to be the gap financing for projects is going to be critical if we want to have a mix of housing types for a mix of income levels for a mix of people at different ages. So yes, we have had multiple conversations. Again, this is the guiding or planning document, not the nitty-gritty.
Right. Yeah,
It's
I
going
know.
to come to me, hopefully, to how do we enact these plans.
And then just kind of affordable housing in general. And maybe our friend online can help with this, even though I said I didn't have any more questions for them. But, one of my fears, or I think it's reality, with affordable housing is, as a couple people said, we don't live in a bubble. Mm-hmm. It's not like we have a moat around Howard County. We have that, we've identified that shortage of housing. We know what that number is. And if we solve that problem, we're good to go. Because we probably could. It's not an insurmountable number. But we don't live in a bubble. So as we start providing more, the demand's going to grow too. Mm-hmm. And, you never actually meet the demand. I mean, I don't think that's reality. So, where have we seen in the country where a region has come together, multiple counties, not one county trying to solve this problem of its own demand plus stuff that's going to be coming in? Where have we seen like a regional approach?
We're doing it now. I mean, I'm part of the regional housing group. And so, for example, we have pooled our vouchers so that there are vouchers that come into the system, and some go to Anne Arundel, some go to Baltimore, some go to Hartford, some go to City of Laurel. We have already started doing that. So I meet with that group every month. And we talk about how we can have regional housing solutions, because you're right. If we have all the affordable housing and Anne Arundel doesn't, we're not ever going to meet that demand. That's absolutely true. So we talk about analysis of impediments to fair housing. We talk about how to have more affordable housing units. We talk about how to do vouchers. We talk about the mix between rental and home ownership. We talk about all that as a region. So we're already doing that.
But how about from a true funding creation of doorknobs? You know, what are if we go out and say we're going to create 10,000 over the next 10 years, what commitment do we have from other counties to do the same?
So we need from the state, and we've talked to Secretary Day a couple times as a regional group already, that he cannot pit county against county and make points in the low-income housing tax credit application more advantageous to one county or another, that is very important. And so we've talked about the different ways that the state has kind of made us in competition with other jurisdictions. And the state's going to have to look at a statewide regional plan, and they have done an assessment. They did an assessment 2 or 3 years ago, and I was involved in that assessment as well, as to what the state should be doing over the next 10 years. But this is a regional problem. Maryland is very well known for jobs, not just schools, but jobs, because of all the federal jobs here. And so it is a regional problem. And while we cannot address that in our general plan, we can address it when we go to implement.
Because I think that there's a lot of things that are national, regional, statewide, whatever problems that exist, right? And we, because frankly, at least, you know, it's getting harder and harder, but can afford it, we want to be the ones to go out and solve it. We want to be the first ones to go out and solve it. But with like affordable housing, again, if everybody around us is doing it, we're just chasing our tail and spending taxpayers' money. You know, so it does seem to me that it almost needs to be a state-led effort and a state-funded effort to say, look, this Central Maryland needs, not Howard County needs, Anne Arundel County needs, but Central Maryland needs. And if a project gets built on this side or this side of Anne Arundel or Howard County, it really doesn't matter, because from a resident standpoint, you don't really care, right?
No, but it just also means we can't do nothing. We have to,
Right.
We have to do things. What we hope that the region will, and we do hope that the state, and with our new governor, we're very optimistic that the regions can work together and like you said, consider Maryland as a whole. We absolutely, you know, I know there are people who drive over the bridge to come here and work. You know, that would, I could not do that myself, but I know there are
couldn't either, because the older I get, the scarier it gets.
But I know there are people that do that.
I'm a
you know.
middle lane the whole way.
You know, and on Fridays in the summer, they work from home.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think you're right to think we should have a regional approach. We should have a statewide approach, but we can't not do anything in Howard County while we wait for that to happen.
I understand we can't not do anything in Howard
Right.
County, but as Deb noted, like, so much of this general plan, every chapter is, like, if I did a word search, affordable might show up as much as and. You know, I mean, it is, that seems to be the cornerstone of this general plan. And, you know, I do think it's relevant to say, you know, it's, to what extent are we just going to build, and, you know, create, and spend, to try to create a region, to even do our part for a regional problem that nobody else is really stepping up to do their part on.
I'll just give you an example, the Live Where You Work program that we're doing with Columbia Downtown Housing Corporation and the hospital. You know, there are hospital workers who are CNAs or GNAs, or they work in food service or maintenance or those type of positions. And they're really struggling to live here, and yet the hospital's open 365 days a year. And so the hospital's saying to us, how do we create units where our workforce can live here? And these are critical to the needs of our residents. Our residents need the services of that hospital. So, you know, to have the employer continually say, what are we doing to create housing at different price points for, I'm not worried about doctors. They're going to be fine. They're going to buy Bruce and Jason and homes, and they're going to be fine. I'm talking about the people who are serving our residents. I think it's it's just sad that we don't have options for them to be able to find housing, and they can't afford $2,000 a month or $3,000 a month. And those are where the rents are. The rents are over $2,000 a month, and they cannot afford it. So that, I think that's what we're trying to address here is we need the housing at all the different price points and all the different types. But you're right, regionally and statewide, it needs to be a bigger conversation.
Yeah. And can I just make one clarification about the use of the term affordable specifically in this general plan?
I know it's not used more affordable than and.
Sorry? No, I didn't do a quick word count here as I was sitting here. I just wanted to clarify a couple of definitions that we did provide in the beginning of the chapter, which we took from the Housing Opportunities Master Plan. So how we defined affordable can refer to what's considered quote-unquote attainable housing, or what was the word that I heard somebody use a little bit earlier, rational? Was that rationally priced? Rationally priced housing. Okay, so that is
I'm
basic.
coming to Fulton, I need a rational price.
So affordable means what's defined as attainable housing, but it can also mean income restricted housing. And we tried to make a distinction when we're referring to something that's attainable versus income restricted. And we need both, as Kelly was just saying. So the attainable housing is just basically housing types that can be more rationally priced for our workforce. It means that it's not necessarily that there would be financial subsidy coming behind it. It's just more rationally priced as a result of it being a smaller unit, right? So that's where some of those missing middle housing types come into play. Whereas income restricted means that there's some sort of intervention, subsidy regulation that requires there be a low to moderate income, a certain percentage of units that are only affordable to low to moderate income households that meet certain income requirements. So I just want to point out, if you see affordable referenced in the plan, it could mean it's likely referring to just that the home is priced rationally for a workforce, for whatever the income is that somebody is making.
Got it, thank you.
Ms. Simoneau, are you familiar with Anne Arundel County's general plan or Montgomery County's Thrive general plan?
Parts of them.
Are you aware of the focus that they put on affordable housing in their jurisdictions?
Yes. For example, we're changing zoning to allow all different housing types and eliminate single family as a requirement. Yes.
And I can tell you, Anne Arundel County mentions affordable 65 times in a 76-page Word document. And Montgomery County mentions affordable 106 times in a 246-page document. So I don't know what those...
How many times did they say and?
Control F. But
Well, it's good.
so what I want to say is that, you know, when you look at the plans that are not just in draft like ours, but you actually look to our neighbors' plans and you go through them, they are struggling with very similar things. I mean...
Well, I will tell you, too, I talk to Anne Arundel County very, very often because they have started an inclusionary zoning program and they are looking to us for guidance, but they just passed ADUs.
I was about to say.
So all of us in the region are dealing with this, and Montgomery County passed ADUs a couple years ago. Several have updated their right of first refusal based on the changing conditions and the environment post-pandemic. So when I talk to Anne Arundel, when I talk to Baltimore, when I talk to, you know, the different jurisdictions, we're all doing this. And we're all struggling with the same exact issues as you mentioned.
And hopefully the state sees that we're all struggling with it, and as they're getting ready to cram Kerwin down our throat and all these other things, they realize that they're going to have to start writing maybe bigger checks to help.
Right, well, where are
as
the
well.
teachers going to live that we're going to be paying for Kerwin?
Well, Secretary
Well, they're
Day
going to
was
be able to
very,
afford to live anywhere soon.
right. Well,
Not at
Secretary Day was
60,000.
very responsive, and he met with all of us personally to say, you know, he understands the struggles that we are all facing, particularly in the housing environment after this pandemic. You
Because
know,
I think we all want to do as much for everybody as we can in government. It's just that, you know, you do have limited dollars, you know, where you're going to make the most impact. And, you know, affordable housing is hard because you can't, you have no ability to control the demand.
Well,
So-
housing is hard in general.
Yeah.
You know, as we mentioned, the homes in Columbia that are 60 years old need renovations. And, you know, we're looking at our renovation program. Sometimes the payment is restrictive, that people can't afford a payment. So we're looking at, does it need to be a grant that they don't repay till they sell? You know, we're looking at changes because someone who's on a fixed income can't even afford $125 a month in a loan repayment. But yet they need a roof, they need an HVAC system, you know, things of that nature. So we're looking at that.
And I think things like a repayable grant, or I don't think that's a bad idea at all.
Right.
You know, as long as, because a lot of your programs, unlike a lot of like regular grant programs, your programs recycle the same dollars.
We do.
You know, and that's,
We do.
You know, that's my preference.
And we
We've talked
recycle
about
our
that.
MIHU homes too.
I know you do. You know where everyone is, I know.
Actually, this is a great segue, because my question that I was going with through, you know, I wanted to, one, touch on the regional aspect. I know you do a lot of work with BMC, and, you know, I very much appreciate David Pontius and his work and the reports that your team has worked to write that really talk about the regional needs and how the regions are working together to address these things. But back during budget, one of the things that we touched on was that we don't expend all of our settlement down payment dollars. And you know, the biggest thing that you said then, can you remind me what that was? What do we need to be able to expend these dollars so we get home ownership opportunities for our residents, for our lower income residents, so they can, you know, work at the hospital, they can be home health care aides, they can be our paraeducators who are serving our children, they can, you know, they work as administrative assistants and police officers. What do we need to do so that way we can expend all of that settlement down payment program money to make sure that people are housed?
We need housing units.
Thank you. Ms. Young?
Everybody needs housing units. That's
Yes.
what we're going back to. That's
Correct.
the whole country. That's Howard County. That's Maryland. Yeah.
Correct.
And we are short on that. I'm trying to, again, read between the lines here. Are you envisioning ADUs in this general plan as of right? Is that what the point of writing about ADUs, the way that it has been written about here in
So-
the general plan?
Yeah, so right now in our zoning regulations, attached accessory dwelling units are allowed as an accessory use, right?
Right.
By right in
Yes.
certain zoning districts. And yes,
Right.
we are suggesting that also to look for opportunities to allow detached accessory dwelling units as well.
As of right.
Correct.
So there would not be any regulations that go along with that, or
The idea-
how would that work?
The idea is that the regulations would be pre-approved and predetermined. So essentially, you would look at the criteria of where these would be appropriate, on what kind of lots, what their setbacks and heights and design styles could be, such that the public process has already occurred. There's predictability for homeowners who are seeking this and for homeowners that this might occur next to them. So it's really about taking the process and streamlining it, making it succinct upfront.
So how many detached ADU units have been built recently? Not that many, have there? I thought it was like a really small number.
No, detached is.
Detached.
Right, so detached members only allowed conditional, for a
So you
through a
have to go
conditional
through before the
use,
hearing
and
examiner.
only
It's
allowed on a-
conditional use.
And only on a temporary basis for an elderly or sick family
Right.
member.
I'm aware of that.
Yeah.
But so I'm asking, do you know how many have been built?
Yeah, I think we have that number in the plan, and it may have been one in the last 5 years or something. Yeah. And then I think, how many, what was it, 99 attached in the last 5 years? Permitted? Yeah.
99 in the last 5 years, right?
For-
I believe that's the numbers.
So you
Yeah.
said 99 attached.
Attached.
Yeah.
But did you say how many detached? You don't know.
It was one in
One.
the same time period.
One detached ADU.
Yeah, one of the-
Okay.
That poor
So
person.
this isn't exactly something that people will probably rush to be doing, I would imagine.
Yeah, I mean, this is not, ADUs are not going to be the primary way that we address the housing shortage in Howard County. They are one option that can be very appropriate in established neighborhoods in particular. So they're just one tool in the tool belt to address the housing issues.
So why are we then going to direct the Apfo task force to develop recommendations applicable to ADUs in the Apfo ordinance, given the number of ADUs? Why would we specifically exempt them or create new rules for them or even address them?
Primarily because that particular housing type tends to be smaller. A lot of times they're built as studios. So the people that typically occupy ADUs are not families who are generating large children amounts.
But what if they're not? Shouldn't they be subject to the same rules as everybody else?
I think what we're asking the APO task force is to determine what is the yields and the impacts of these housing types, looking at what all the other jurisdictions can tell us about what they have implemented, and saying what is appropriate to actually compare the results of this housing type to what we actually need to account for.
Okay.
Mr. Youngin?
I'm not done yet.
Sorry.
So I do want to get back to this whole concept of missing middle, because I think that the only way that, listening to the people who would end up having to build it or represent the kinds of people who would be building missing middle, that the only way that missing middle could end up getting built here in Howard County would be some pretty major incentives. Otherwise, I don't know that that would happen. And I don't know if you've thought about any incentives other than density.
Yeah, so I was coughing and losing my voice when I was explaining this policy statement. But basically what we'd have to do once we get to the comp rezoning, we'd have to take a look at how we would need to both change our zoning regulations to allow these housing types or incentivize these housing types. So some additional ways is through tax incentives for property owners or developers. So that is a little bit of an incentive for these housing types.
What kind of tax incentives are available? I'm curious. I don't have any idea.
It would probably be something in the form of a property tax incentive. That would be one example. And then also flexible development standards would be looked at as well as a part of the comp rezoning to determine whether or not that could be another incentive for these housing types. So
what would that entail?
Smaller, so for example, smaller lot sizes or allowing additional lot coverage for these housing types. Other things that we've discussed are looking at ways that we could help to create a more streamlined, predictable site development plan review process, such as pre-approved site plans. And then the plan does look at things like limited Apfo exemptions for some of these housing types. But it's all things to evaluate once we get to the comp rezoning and the Apfo task force. And then, Jess, would you like to add some stuff?
Right. It's just that when I see words like this in the general plan, and I'm thinking about what to take out and what to leave in, I feel like I need to know what the thinking is, behind these words in order to, say, okay, I'm comfortable with that and I will leave that in. Not that it's up to me, but I mean, I won't be writing an amendment to take it out, I guess would be the better way to say it.
Well, one thing just to keep in mind about zoning, so a lot of this is giving guidance for the next process. And the next process will, once we make those changes to the zoning regulations, still has to come to council and get approved. So this document in and of itself is not changing the zoning. There will be another process to change the zoning, which again, will come to council.
Right.
So at least this gives us the chance to evaluate it and investigate it, to really try to dig in and understand how we can make this happen.
Okay.
Right, Mr. Youngman. Oh. All right, well, let me pass out a handout.
Something makes me think after the handout, I won't be done. What do you think?
Yes, yes, it is. It is what Jeff Ronow provided. Because on ADUs, I was wondering if you could touch on what percentage of the total units are you predicting will be ADUs? Yes. Oh,
About
it's
what?
it comes up quick, let me tell you.
It's about, it's about
It's on the bottom left.
1.2%. Is that right? I'm just trying to do it in my head.
So the total that's impacted, so from 2022 to 2040, over the life of this entire plan, the estimate is throughout the county, we're looking at about 468 as part of the 6. And that is broken out across all of the geographic areas. So that's, Columbia, Elk Ridge, Ellicott City, Rural West, and the Southeast.
The whole county,
The entire
no matter
county.
how small it may be.
Yes. So it's, as I said, it is a tool. It is a tool that is very useful for specific circumstances that address specific needs. But it is not, the silver bullet for the housing issue.
Because it's less than 2%. It's 1.8% of total new units that we're really looking at. And I think there's been a lot of agita by certain people online about them. And I think it's really important to really understand the impact of what we're talking about here and the life-changing opportunities it is for a family to have a parent living with them, to support that caregiving aspect, to have your parents there so you can support them. Your sister gets a divorce and she needs somewhere to live with her kids. Well, not with her kids because she can't fit in a studio. She's not moving there. But maybe
Well, that assumes it's a studio, but you just mentioned with her kids.
And it also assumes a related party,
those
which
kids are already
we
here.
talked about is not going to
But they'd
likely
be
be a
moving to
requirement.
another overcrowded school. I mean, there's a developer in town, as we well know, who was stopped from developing a house, 7 houses, because of an overcrowded school just a couple months ago.
So let's get back to ADUs, which is what my question focuses on, which are promoted by AARP, which are promoted by Age Friendly Howard County, which are promoted by many of our seniors who would like these options. And to clarify, do you think that ADUs are something that like a professional developer would come in and then build hundreds of ADUs all at once? Or is this more of a homeowner-driven process, so it's much more singular and follows kind of how our single home process exists currently?
I think they could be incorporated into new development, but given the environment that we have here in Howard County, I think you're more likely to see this as select infill development on the lots that can accommodate them.
And can I just chime in
Yes,
some
please.
of what we've heard during the public process?
That'd be
So
really helpful.
so we do have properties out there that have, say, detached garages, and we have heard feedback from the public, and they've said, well, why can't I convert my detached garage into a rental apartment? I'd really like to just renovate that space and create a rental opportunity for myself, especially as I plan for myself over the next 5 to 10 years when I'm going to retire.
Right, and if we're not building, then property taxes are going up, and those escalations are happening, and what their fixed income they might have counted on 10 years ago, they know that they're not going to be able to count on that
Right.
10 years from now.
Right. And not only with detached garages, I mean, prior to 1971, our zoning regulations did allow 2 residential units on a single-family lot. So we did have a time in our history when we allowed detached accessory dwelling units, especially in a lot of our historic properties. They have old carriage houses on their sites. So there are some properties that are already set up and established to have they already have a structure on their site that could be used as a detached accessory dwelling unit.
And I do want to build on that, is that the issue, we allow accessory apartments right now, but they have to be incorporated into the structure. And that's problematic for some of our older housing stock where you might only have a 1,300 square foot home, but it might be on a larger lot where it could accommodate a separate building in the back. And they don't want to necessarily expand onto their existing home. And then you have historic properties where actually having a separate ADU built on that is better for the integrity of the historic property because you're not impacting it by adding something that's not compatible onto that building, but you're still addressing needs in that community. What we're really talking about in the general plan is flexibility in this housing type so that it can be evaluated for attached or detached based on design criteria that are appropriate for those lots in those neighborhoods.
And they can't be subdivided and sold. You have a single owner. It's one lot owned by owned by an owner, which could be a couple. But it's not, I was a little confused, Mr. Young, when you were talking about selling an ADU or having separate owners for ADUs, because it was always my understanding that it's one lot with two structures.
And I think I think there was something that came up, I saw somewhere where the ownership structure wasn't necessarily being directed or covered in the general plan, and
Yeah, and
I think that way too, and I think that we should stay looking at it that way.
One of the things, and this is really, I guess this is for like 3 years from now, but going to the owner-occupied restrictions, when it comes to financing, you could imagine how challenging that would be on a standard house, that a bank would not want to do the financing if it was only owner-occupied, because that bank would have no opportunity to reclaim that property. So and I raise it as an issue because that financing hurdle has proved to be an issue in other communities with other banking institutions.
Well,
So it's just an important consideration.
It is, and it's the consideration when somebody's trying to buy that house. Like, if you...
We're trying to build it.
If you
and
turn
buy it,
around and
yeah.
rent your house right now, your lender's not going to know. They're not. And when they go to foreclose on it, they're going to realize there's a tenant there and there's going to be issues. But there's just no mechanism to check on that. So if you rented out your ADU, that would be an issue.
No, I mean from the regulatory standpoint, if we're requiring they be owner-occupied, or the bank can't own it and occupy it because the bank is an entity.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Oh.
And so that's where it gets into the financing challenges where they aren't, and it is so complicated because we're here at this stage, but then this other thing that isn't, but that's what I want us to be mindful of as we're working through this, because we really should be supporting our homeowners in managing their property and and executing their property rights.
I do just want to represent the other side too, because you all keep saying this is what we hear, but I hear other things, and I just want you to know that I keep hearing that people are very fearful about what could end up, what the parking could end up being like. We're not great in this county. I know we seem to either overpark or underpark. We seem to overpark our retail, and then we underpark our attached homes, and particularly the over 55 attached homes.
Because people don't use their garages.
But there's also, right, the 55-plus issue comes up because people either have 3 cars for 2 people, which I still don't understand.
I'm talking about the property that's right around the corner from me, the Scott property, where literally they park on Harmel Road, which is a 2-lane road, and they take up 1 lane of our 2-lane road because there is no parking in the Scott property.
But I
None.
thought you said they were
Zero.
using their garages for storage.
No, they are
And then their
parked.
guests
No,
are
there's
parking
no
on the
there's no
street.
place for them to park in that property either. They have to park either in their garages or in their driveways.
That's
There's
where
no
they're
place.
supposed to be parking.
There's like 3 spaces. There's very little space. If you invite like 8 people over, next thing you know, Harmel Drive is all cars.
Should we be regulating for an occasional party, or should we be regulating for the people who regularly live there?
I'm just telling you that there is not enough parking for people who are coming to visit on a regular basis. But that is a whole nother issue. And that is something that people are fearful about with the ADUs. So that's one thing that people are fearful about, particularly for ADUs that could be built on cul-de-sacs where there's less parking, because of the way the cul-de-sacs were built, in particular in Columbia, with very little actual parking spaces in the cul-de-sac unless you park in your driveway or if you're on the circle part of the cul-de-sac.
A lot of times there's not even room between those
No, there's no room between the driveways. That's correct. So that's one issue. Another issue is that people are fearful that if it is a newly built ADU, that it would create stormwater management issues for another home that was nearby. And a third issue is that people could create these ADUs and that a family would move in, and that this would be a way to this would be how people would find their way into overcrowded schools at a potentially at a much cheaper price, which I suppose, given the word affordable, maybe 184 times, that would be a good thing for some people to be able to do that. But that's what I'm hearing. Okay, so I just want you to know that there is another side of this discussion.
Yeah, thank you for pointing that out. And we do mention that also in the plan, and we do discuss different actions as it pertains to some of those concerns. I can kick it off, and then if you want to add some stuff. Okay. So specifically, though, within one of the actions, as we look at updating the zoning and land development regulations to allow attached and detached ADUs, as Jess mentioned, it has to meet predetermined location and site criteria, but we will also have to provide parking requirements as needed. Specifically, so places are neither underparked nor overparked, so that would absolutely be a part of the evaluation to identify how to determine what parking requirements would be for ADUs. Also, as it pertains to stormwater management, I might want to just kick that one over to you, if you don't mind, or do you want me to jump in? Or?
We might pass it right to Chad.
To Chad, okay.
Who's the expert on our stormwater management, because I think he can address sort of the way stormwater management looks like a lot in total and not just the parts of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, let's see, is he still here? Chad, are you there?
Yes, I'm still here.
Excellent, excellent. How are you?
What a trooper.
Yeah.
Stormwater management would be based on the actual impervious area of square foot per square foot. So whether it's a 2,000 square foot house, you would have the same proportionality of management as you would if you added an additional 1,000 square feet of impervious area, and you would have to treat it at the same proportion. So as long as the lot itself has enough green space to handle that additional proportion. So that would be the thought going forward, that you can't make the lot so small, I'll call it the floor ratio, it's not quite right, but you can't make the lot so small that you don't leave enough room for these facilities such as bioretention facilities and dry wells and so on.
Mm-hmm. And there are multiple things that can contribute to increasing impervious surface on a lot that you would count to determine whether or not the stormwater management regulations apply. I mean, people put sheds on their property, people expand their driveways, people put home modifications. They do home modifications, all of which expands the impervious surface footprint. So this all would have to sort of get calculated in just the way that has to be considered. So would the ADU. So the same regulations apply to all of the new development, essentially new construction on a person's property. And then with regards to whether or not a family moves in, I mean, I just think that is, if a person who is renting their accessory unit, I mean, they have a personal choice as to who they would rent to. I mean, ADUs are intended to be accessory to the primary unit, so generally it wouldn't be any larger. And I'm looking to Linda just because we've had these conversations. So it wouldn't be any larger than the primary structure. It's generally can't be any more than a certain size of what the primary structure is.
That's interesting, because the larger lots tend to have smaller homes. So you're saying it would be based off of the home size, not the lot size.
Well, I guess it depends.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. It depends on how we write the ordinance and how we allow for detached ADUs. So you can put those limitations on there, certainly.
What is the total number of units that we have, housing units that we have in Howard County right now? I was trying to find it quickly before when I was doing the percentages, and I couldn't. I got like 2021 numbers. Oh, is it on here? Then my bad.
It's 100 something. I think it's 121.
Well, we know how many building permits have been issued since 21, so it's probably, what, 5 more than it was in 2021? So I'll just go off those numbers. But that would mean that the percentage of units that are housing people in Howard County that are ADUs would be 0.38%. And so I think it's so important that I think it's caused outsized angst to the actual impact that we're looking at and to the benefit provided to those 468. It's actually pairs of people, right? It's the person moving in and it's the owner, and it's this communal pairing that it's benefiting. So to pull a Dr. Jones, it's great to bring it back to the data and really look at our numbers and what we're talking about. Because if we've had one detached ADU built with these, significant restrictions and 99 attached, this is such a small percentage of new units and such a small percentage of overall units that I think, and I don't think it's such a small percentage that we shouldn't do it. But I think it's in the yes and realm. And so, all right, Mr. Youngman, back to you. Oh, you said you're done.
Well, I agree with you that it's not going to be a lot, and I would imagine most of them will be in the West, because I think we're going to probably be pretty careful on regulations on R20 and smaller. But for something that, yes, is going to benefit, 1,000 or so families, property owners, and the people that benefit from the ADU, you've got neighbors on either side too. And those are the people you're going to interact with all the time.
Yep.
Because of parking.
Yep.
And because of...
But we don't have anything that regulates the parking now. There's nothing that
I know.
restricts. So if you have 4 teenagers,
I know.
it's crazy. But if you have...
It is crazy if you have 4 teenagers and you rent your basement out to somebody with 3. Now you got 7 or 8 cars, and they're parked in the grass, and they're parked in the street. And those are the kinds of... That's how we've kind of caught a few of these sort of being not legally done.
But those would
is
be
because
inside,
neighbors
interior?
Yes, because neighbors have called, and because there's cars everywhere. So I just think that when we go to do this, you're going to have some pretty strict parking type things. Now, in a lot of neighborhoods, you're not going to do it anyway, because covenants aren't going to allow you to do it. But, where there's not neighborhood covenants, I mean, like most modern neighborhood covenants only allow 1 dwelling on a lot.
If I could just make an observation, I think for the people who would choose to follow the regulations and do this legally, I don't know if that scenario would necessarily occur, and if the people are sort of trying to do it under the radar, right? I mean, I just think they may continue to do it under the radar, and we'll have those scenarios. So I think we're just trying to create a pathway for those who want to do it, who want to follow the regulations that we have in place, to create legitimate, maybe supplemental income for themselves, because they are growing older and need to supplement their income, or they need to house their sister-in-law, or their young child who they don't want to put them in their basement, or their in-laws, or their parents.
Or they still want to walk down the street and play the bridge game with the other ladies.
And it's interesting
Mahjong.
that
That's
you
what it
just,
is these days.
that you just circled the projection of 0 in the rural West. I mean, I guess that assumption's because there's going to be septic issues. I mean, that's where you see people with detached garages and storage space upstairs that could do an ADU tomorrow, and it would be easy. And frankly, a lot of them are doing it anyway already, and we just don't know it.
I think when we look at the rural West, when we're talking ADUs, we're really looking at the capacity. So, you could have a septic system that can absorb this many bedrooms, and then you could have a home that is well under that capacity, and so that might be appropriate for an accessory use. Whereas a home that you've already reached your capacity for your septic,
One might think it was that simple, dealing with
I did simplify it down.
septic in Howard County.
Yes. I'm not gonna,
Well-
I'm not gonna dive too far in those weeds, because I've had the
Yeah.
discussions, and I'm like, that's
It's
not
sort
my
of a
area.
follow-up. Can I just, there was an, over and over again in the the RC Elco report, there was a mention of the shadow renting that was going on in the West. Is the shadow renting illegal renting? Is that why it's called shadow? Or is it, what was the purpose of calling it shadow renting as opposed to just renting?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I'm really glad we didn't have him leave yet. So Jake, Mr. Ross, would you mind joining us again to explain what the shadow rental market is?
I think it's because they don't have a rental license.
Yeah, sure. And so the term
It's
shadow
illegal.
market rental refers to basically any unit that is individually owned as opposed to owned by a developer or property management company and then rented out to another individual. And so it's not illegal necessarily. It's just someone who happens to own a home and then rents it out to someone else. And the reason
so
why we
that's
call it
legal.
the shadow market is because it operates independently from the traditional development community or the traditional market per se.
So did you know that when you estimated 7%, was that counting up rental licenses that have been applied for in Howard County for the western part of the county? Is that, or was that just, well, there's X number of houses out there and generally X number of people rent their homes in these kinds of areas, sort of thing, making an estimate?
That it was an estimate based off of the portion of single family detached homes and townhomes in that area that are rented. Or that are renter occupied, I should say.
I mean, that seemed high to me, but I don't know. You might know better. Does it seem high to you?
I mean, I know you're making an estimate because a lot of places don't have rental license, like Carroll County doesn't have rental license, do they? So there's no way to quantify it. But here in Howard County, you can get a real number. And then you'd have to make some assumption for people who are renting out a basement without a license. And I'm sure there's people doing that. But for the most part, I think
There are
people have been
people
pretty.
renting out their whole house and living elsewhere. And so
Yeah.
that would take.
But do they get a license?
Probably, maybe not.
Okay.
That's what he's talking about, too.
Yeah,
So
that's hard.
We have some that get a license
Yeah.
and some who don't. And as Mary said, if we make ADUs an option, people who do want to do it the right way would have a legal path to do so. You're still going to have people who convert their garage without telling anybody.
I'm good. No, it's closing in on 10 o'clock.
I have one more question.
There you go.
All right. You mentioned in here an affordable housing overlay district. And I guess where it says Howard County's existing infrastructure is underutilized. So I'm wondering, where do you anticipate that would be located? Let's see, DN 49.
Page DN 49. Okay. So we're talking about the, establish the working group to evaluate the feasibility of the incentive program? Is that, I'm sorry, could you repeat your question?
Well, this general plan talks about an affordable housing overlay district.
Yes.
So first, I'd like to know what it is and where in Howard County is existing infrastructure underutilized? Because that was one of
according to the Housing
Yep,
Opportunities Master
that
Plan.
the overlay district should.
Okay.
Yes, that is one of the shoulds. It should be located where existing infrastructure is underutilized. So I was just trying to think, where would that be in Howard County? So how would we create this overlay district?
Okay. Well, So basically, again, this was a recommendation that came out of the Housing Opportunities Master Plan, and in my understanding of it, the idea is that we want to try to identify places in the county where perhaps we don't have as much affordable housing options as there are in other areas. So this strategy is to try to diversify or kind of deconcentrate where we might have concentrations of lower and moderate income
That's
households.
not what this sentence says.
No, I understand
This
what this other
sentence
sentence
says,
is.
yes.
Now, yeah, I see where it is consider areas of the county. So where this affordable housing overlay district could be, might also be areas of the county where existing infrastructure is underutilized and therefore could support additional residential density with limited new public investment.
That's what it says.
That is what it says. And I don't know if those places were actually envisioned through the Housing Opportunities Master Planning process. I think we were just trying to help describe what those considerations would be if you were to identify an overlay district of this type. So I don't know.
Well, I would
if-
love to know where in Howard County that exists.
Okay.
So, well, I have a good follow-up for that, which is
Okay.
that this plan covers 10, 20 years. So we're not necessarily looking at today, but with declining birth rates, declining permits, declining school enrollment.
I think, generally, because general plan, it's that when we're looking at an overlay district, you're creating the vision for that district and setting the criteria where you're essentially saying, if these are met, this is when it can be pulled down and put down in place. So, you would basically, one of the factors you might be considering of when is it appropriate to pull it down is what is the existing infrastructure and is there capacity that exists within that? So that's kind of why you do an overlay, because you're basically not pinpointing it at this particular moment in time.
All right, well, thank you to everyone for your participation this evening. I do recognize that we're really grappling with, decisions made in 1926 from Euclid at the Supreme Court and subsequent policy decisions following that. And all of the history really brings us to the problems that we are trying to solve today for our residents now and in the future. So I appreciate everyone's dedication and time this evening. And we'll see you next time. Thank you.
September.